All right, we're going to start this series of videos loosely following the book The Lost History of Christianity, the 1,000-year golden age of the church in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, and how it died by Philip Jenkins. I recommend this book for various reasons. It's very important to understand that Christianity is not just European Christianity. However, I have some caveats about some of the approaches that the book has. But as a subject, this is a really interesting subject, and I thought it could be the underlying frame by which we're going to talk about this fascinating history. Not just of Christianity, I'm going to also talk about Islam and Judaism as it corresponds to this area and this time. But basically, the focus is going to be mainly Christianity. So to start with, let me just get this right. Yep. So the overarching idea of this book is that religions die, and even big religions die, like Christianity as well. The history of the first 1,000 years of Christianity doesn't look anything like the history of the following 1,000 years. And that's because Christianity found its golden era, its golden age in many areas where now barely exists. And I think it's a really fascinating history, a very important history to understand. So, as I say, we always give a Euro-American emphasis, and it seems to be unnatural when seen against the broader background of Christian history. In the later Middle Ages, there was mass defections and persecutions. So in Asia and the Middle East, Christianity, of course, in the Middle East, it continued in the Jerusalem area. But the area that we call today Iraq, Iran, and also even India, never mind China, big seismic changes happened there in the Middle Ages that changed the whole landscape for Christianity forever. So Christianity then was a three-continental religion. It was in Europe, Africa, and Asia. And here's this amazing map of how Jerusalem is here in the middle. And, let me get back to this. And Asia, Africa also was a big part of Christianity. Not just in the Arab area, but also in Black Africa, in the area of Ethiopia, and there's still Christians there. The only big Christian denomination that triumphed and is still very, very strong is in Egypt, the Coptic, and we're going to see why Coptics survived and the rest of them. It's not so much that they disappeared, although in the area of Libya and Tunisia and Morocco, it completely disappeared. And bear in mind that this was a very important area for Christianity. No other than St. Augustine actually is an African saint. And we're going to see how it appeared and how it disappeared in that area. So we're also going... So here's just a visual representation what we're going to be talking about. So this is the spread of Christianity in the first 600 years of its era and the movements that happened from Jerusalem all over to Anatolia, the Greek area, Africa as well, and Spain, France, and what is modern England. So yes, there was a spread of Christianity in Europe, but there was also a spread of Christianity that went all the way to Samarkand in modern day, I think it's Turkmenistan. Yeah, but it's like, just to give you an idea, it's in the middle of Asia. That's as far as Christianity went, and also to China, actually. We're going to talk about Chinese Christian history in the first millennia, which is really fascinating. It is very much connected to a massive rebellion that happened in the 8th century and how Christianity actually helped during the Tang dynasty. Also in India, yeah, Saint Thomas went to India according to legend, and it's a very specific type of Christianity. And it's very interesting that later, when European powers started to colonize all those areas, how some of those churches actually reverted back to the Roman Church when they had not been Roman ever, actually, not even from the time of the Chalcedon Council. So also in Africa, Christianity will spread as far as the Ogaden region, which is a region here in modern-day Ethiopia and Somalia. And a really interesting Christianity was started there. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about that, and just to address some of the cliches of this book. Yeah, some of the things that are not to be agreed with, but they're never mind it. Nonetheless, they are part of the frame of this book. Yeah. So when we move our focus away from Europe, everything we think we know about Christianity shifts kaleidoscopically. For example, year 800 Charlemagne, most of Western Europe under a united Christian rule. The Pope crowned him emperor, consecrating the association of church and state in the medieval West. We could also say the separation of church and state actually happened. For many modern observers, this coronation symbolizes much that is distasteful about the history of Christianity. Its alliance with state power, its thoroughly European nature, arrogant isolation from other faiths and culture. It implies a theocratic regime, stringent moral and doctrinal codes enforced through law, while Jews and other outsiders excluded or subjected. Okay, these are just cliches. They are topical, representations of what Christianity actually is. And we don't accept that, but that's more or less a sort of ideological background of the book, which has as a very interesting feature that is going to address this other history of Christianity that I think, I agree, is very, very important. I'm not saying that the author believes these cliches. It's like he is saying what other authors would at least see actual Christianity as, and he's sort of expanding kaleidoscopically the frame of it. This is a very interesting image of Charlemagne as emperor, which is represented here as a Roman emperor. Yeah, not so much as you normally see him with the beard and the medieval regalia, but more in this coin, which is actually the best representation that we have of him of the time, because all the representations that we have of him are much later representations of Charlemagne. This one actually represents perhaps the ideal that they wanted to portray as the renaissance of the Roman Empire. Remember, we have done a series about Erigena, John Scotus Erigena, and he is from that time. He's an Irish monk, probably, who wrote a very important metaphysical tractatus called the Periphysium. So Christian states were associated with ignorance in a world that remembered only vestiges of classical learning and science. I think this is also topical. A cliche, given the relevance of the works of Erigena. The fact that you don't know these works doesn't mean that they didn't exist, and it doesn't mean that they're incredibly relevant for not only for the time, for our time. And this is why I'm doing this, yeah, because this is relevant for us, because there's parts of our history and there's parts of our philosophy that have been forgotten, and they actually radically lie in the solution of the problems that we have today. Never forget that this is the reason why I do this serious stuff. These sort of obscure things that might seem completely irrelevant for today, but they're not. So, although Charlemagne, how do you pronounce this in English? Charlemagne, I think it is presided over a renaissance of sorts. No, it was an actual real renaissance. It was a pallid affair compared with the ancient world, to say nothing of the true renaissance of the 15th century. Yeah, when you look at the, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but when you look at the so-called Renaissance of the Italian Renaissance, of course, this is a time where great art and culture was cultivated, and it symbolizes a break with the medieval ages. Not, of course, it was a gradual thing, but it took enormous momentum during the 15th and 16th century. But this doesn't mean that the Carolingian Renaissance was not an actual real Renaissance, and that very important basis for what Europe will be in the future were laid at that time. Never mind if you put it in contrast with what was happening in Spain, for example, with the whole Arab invasion, the Muslim invasion. And this is obviously extremely important, because you can have Renaissance where everything sort of shines through, and it's a time of great cultural and economic development. But you also can say that there are Renaissances that represent the roots of what we are, and this is what the Carolingian Renaissance was, and is very important to understand. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. So then we are here in some examples here in the photographs that give testimony to Christianity in the Mesopotamian area. In this regard, we're going to cover more. We're going to cover even India and China and Central Asia. But more in the Middle East, we have examples very much so. For example, the Armenian church is going to be extremely important. We have here another example of Saint Elia Monastery, which is a monastery of the 6th century that the animals of ISIS destroyed in 2015, I think it was. You can see it in YouTube. You can see that there is this massive explosion where they destroyed this old monastery forever. Yeah, this savages, these absolute animals from ISIS did this. And we are going to talk about the modern era in future episodes. Yeah. And we're going to give testimony of what ISIS actually was, but this will come later. So we have another beautiful example in Iraq of the Al-Kosh monastery. You can check it out in the internet. Also another Armenian church, which is actually in Iran, in modern day Iran. It's a really beautiful compound, monastic compound. This is the Zakaria Chapel here in quite a bad shape. So Mesopotamia is actually incredibly interesting and important to understand Christian history. This photo, by the way, here of the Tak Kaksra is a Sassanid building, okay, from the Sassanid era, from the Sassanid Empire, of which we are also going to talk about. Christianity in that area developed not within the Roman Empire, but within the Parthian and the Sassanid Empire, and also smaller kingdoms like the kingdoms of Armenia, the kingdoms of Edessa, and also other smaller kingdoms that we're going to be talking about. So Mesopotamia or Iraq retained a powerful Christian culture at least through the 13th century. At about 780 AD, the Bishop Timothy I of Seleucia Ctesiphon became Patriarch or Catholicos of the Church of the East, which was then based at the ancient Mesopotamian city of Seleucia, Ctesiphon. Because of its location close to the Roman frontier, but just far enough beyond it to avoid heavy-handed interference, Timothy was arguably the most significant Christian spiritual leader of his day, more influential than the Pope at the time, and on a par with the Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople. So we're going to talk about now about Timothy the First, and we're going to give a little bit of context, because for these themes it's very important to give context, because it's very easy to get lost as to what are we even talking about historically, because this is very, very unknown territory, especially when it comes in the context of Christianity. Maybe you know about the Parthian Empire, maybe you know about the Sasanian Empire. Of course, you know that Islam took over in the 7th century at the time, but perhaps we wouldn't be able to locate as to what Christianity and how important Christianity was in those areas at those times, because it was not the predominant culture and the predominant religion, although it had very, very, very critical importance for those cultures as well, and for our culture. Because, for example, when we are told, and Timothy is going to be relevant for this, when we are told that it was the Arabs, it was Islam, the culture that gave us numbers, for example, and gave us the translations of Plato and Aristotle, and gave us modern medicine, etc. It was actually through Christians who were there before that all this culture was transmitted. And of course, Arabic was a very important language, but also Syriac. And Syriac was the Syriac language was maintained because Christianity was maintained. Otherwise, it would have disappeared. So we're going to talk about all these things. So this is Timothy the First, who was the patriarch of the Church of the East between 780 and 823. And he was one of the most influential patriarchs in history. He was an author, church leader, diplomat, and also excellent administrator. He reformed the metropolitan administration of the Church of the East, granting greater independence to metropolitan bishops of the exterior provinces, but excluding them from the participation in patriarchal elections. These metropolitan bishops of the exterior provinces are going to be very important for the creation of the churches of the Far East. These reforms laid the foundations for the later success of church in the East missions in Central Asia. So he was born in Hasa, in the region of Adiabene in Assyria, in northwest Mesopotamia, and he was the bishop of the diocese of Beth Bagash and the Hakkari region of eastern Turkey. And this is some photos of the citadel of Erbil, which was in the area of Adiabene. Adiabene was a kingdom. We're going to talk about this because I want to give a little bit of context because we know this area now by Iraq, and we might know about the Persians, we might know about the Arabs and the Mongols, but it's a very interesting history what happened there at the inception of Christianity. So the Adiabene kingdom, for example, was a Jewish kingdom for a while, and the queen and king of Adiabene were actually living in Jerusalem at the time, and we're going to talk about that. I think it's very interesting. Also, this is a modern Catholic cathedral in Erbil, in what will be in the area of Adiabene, where Timothy was born. And it was as I said, it was an independent kingdom, and then it was Parthian, and then it was Sasanian. And it was, of course, ruled by the Zoroastrian religion. So the Sasanians were actually Zoroastrians. Very important literature documents that I would like to actually read. I want to give a taste of how these people thought with their own text. Of course, their translations in English. we cannot read it in the original Syriac, for example, or in Arab, but we're going to give an approximation through beautiful translations that have been done of all these documents to give you a context of where this man lived, and then we're going to talk about also about his own work. So this is the area of the world where Timothy I was born. It was called Adia Bene. It was an independent kingdom for a while. It's in ancient Assyria, and it had, after Monobazus was the first, Adia Bene became a kingdom. It was an independent kingdom, and through his wife became a Jewish kingdom. So it reached its zenith under Isates II, and Isates was the son of Helena, who was the one who converted to Judaism, and actually they lived in Jerusalem and they supported the rebellion against the Roman Empire when the destruction of the temple happened. So this is a very interesting detail. This is, of course, 8 centuries before Timothy was born, but I think it's good to give a little bit of context as to historical context as to the history of this area. So Arbela was the capital of Adia Bene, and there is a very interesting chronicles of this area as to how Christianity was introduced that we're going to talk about a bit later. So the formation of the kingdom is a little bit obscure, but suffice to say that it was very important during this time. Connections with the Armenian kingdom and the great king Tigranes the Great of Armenia, and coinage says that the origin of the kingdom was around 164 BC. It was conquered by the Parthian Empire, Mithridates I, and it was always a realm or a kingdom that was submissive to that greater empire, although it was independent for a while. So important figure here will be Helena of Adia Bene, which in the Talmud will be called Eleni Hamalka, meaning Helen the Queen, who, as I said, moved to Jerusalem and supported the rebellion. There are various sources that we're going to be talking about this interesting period of the history of Adia Bene, and then we will come back to Timothy the First as one of the most important Christians who ever lived. So the Parthians were overthrown by the Sasanian Empire, and then there was no more Jewish empire. No more Jewish kingdom in Adia Bene. And it became a province later of the Sasanian Empire. So here's the article. I'm gonna give you here some of the references, and we're going to continue talking about this interesting time in this part of the world. Let me put the reference here just in case you want to have a look at the references. And you can look at the So we're going to talk now about the Chronicle of Arbela in the context of Adia Bene, which is where Timothy I was born. And just to show that it has a really early, really long history of Christianity in the area, Timothy I will be a patriarch of the Church of the East at the time already when the Umayyads were so the Muslims had already conquered a century before that whole area. But Christianity starts in this area much earlier, and it starts together with Judaism. I think it's a very interesting relation to explore, because in this area, let's not forget that after the destruction of the temple, there was a big Jewish diaspora, and many of them went to the area of the old Babylon, and that's where the Talmud actually developed. And at the same time, Christianity also developed in that area. It's just very easy to forget that actually Christianity was one of the main religions and probably the most influential, even if those empires were actually not Christians themselves. The Parthian Empire, as we have explored, Adiabene was actually a Jewish kingdom in the 1st and 2nd century. And then we have the Sassanids. The Sassanid Empire was very, very repressive against Christians in many of its parts. Yeah, we have some commie music here. Man. It's all one man, by the way. Yeah. Anyway, so let's continue.
Multi's captivated.
No.
Shut Multi up.
So just to show that this is one of the areas where Christianity grounds itself the earliest. And we can see that in this area, not in Adiabene specifically, but in Edessa and also in Armenia, we have the first Christian kingdoms. Yeah. So this is important not to forget, because right now, of course, we have still the Armenian Church, and the Nestorian Church is still in existence, of course. But we are talking about the time when perhaps it was in its golden age, and how that developed is very interesting. So we have here the Chronicle of Arbela. Some scholars, they affirm its authenticity in terms of being completely historical, and some others don't. It is true that it's very early. So Adai, the apostle, he was the one bringing Christianity to this area, and there is some debate as to how early that was. Yeah, so we're gonna see that this is just a Wikipedia article about that, just to show you the deep-rooted history of Christianity in this area. So the Chronicle of Arbela relates to the history of Nestorian Christianity in Adiabene, a northern Mesopotamian province located between the two Zab rivers in what is modern Iraq. So its history is all about the first bishops. It makes a list of the bishops that were named in that area. And this chronicle says that the first bishop was Pekida, who was ordained near the beginning of the 2nd century AD. So that means that's just barely like 70 years after the crucifixion of Christ, yeah? By Adai the apostle, which was one of the first apostles of the New Testament. The second bishop was Sheshom, who preached to participants in the festival of Shaharab-Gamud, which included human sacrifice. One thing that is very important to understand is that in many of these Christian missions, where Christians start to preach the gospel, they really had really awful customs in their own religions. So when they are criticized, actually, we have to bear in mind that if you're going to criticize something that they did that was wrong, that's perfectly fine. But you have to also bear in mind that they saved a lot of those populations from, in this case, as you can see here, human sacrifice, and converted many to Christianity. So then the next one was Ishak. The next one was aided by Rakbakt, the governor of Adiabene, who proposed the heathens and contributed to the spread of Christianity into the countryside. So then we talk about further bishops here. So the chronicle was allegedly written in the 6th century, and the chronicle ends in the 6th century. So it's an enumeration of the bishops that were named for that area. By the time the Trajan's invasion of Adiabene in the 2nd century, the satrapy had been ruled by a Jewish dynasty for more than 75 years. According to the Chronicle of Arbela, Christianity firmly rooted itself in Adiabene in Trajan's time. So this tradition has been rejected by several historians, of course, as it always happens, most notably Budkit. So you can look at all these people and read their books if you're interested. But basically what we are getting here is the idea that Christianity was deeply rooted in this area before it was even Parthian. It was a kingdom that was subservient to the Parthians, but it was an independent kingdom. Then it became subservient to the Parthians, then to the Sassanids, and then it became just a province of the Sassanid Empire. But Christianity still thrived even if the Sassanid Empire was pretty tyrannical against Christians. Yeah, remember there were Zoroastrians and partly also Manichaeans. Yeah, Burkitt is contradicted by other information, which is Eusebius. Well, these things I started to realize that when we are talking about scholarship about these things, normally what the most reasonable version is actually the official version of the church. Yes, and this is not to support the church in and of itself. It's just to say that the most reasonable, where we have the most credible information about the history of this. And also, what I see is that there's a lot of resistance of taking at face value those documents when there is no resistance to take at face value other documents. Yeah, I mean, this could be debated, I guess, but I'm really getting a sense that, so for example, if you're going to talk about the beginning of Christianity, many scholars, they just disregard the Gospels right away, or they put the Gospels in a very different context. But actually, how would the Gospels not be a source for the beginning of Christianity? So what is it in them? Is it just because it's biased, because it's the holy book of Christianity? But Christians have always affirmed the historicity of what happens in the Gospels. And of course, when you get very picky about getting the sequences of events exactly as one would maybe when they analyze, let's say, the Napoleonic Wars, or you want to get everything exactly as it happened. But as we go back in time, sources become less and less specific, but not just for Christianity. They become less specific for the Sasanian Empire, for the Roman Empire, for all kinds of events. Yeah. So the fact that we don't have many sources, we do have them, but the fact that we don't have many sources that are not, so to say, official Christianity, this does not mean that they are not sources. You can't just disregard them. I'm not saying that this is what scholars do. That I'm not saying that they disregard them, but when they pertain to look into actual sources, there seems to be a little bit of academic bias that precedes the actual analysis of what's being analyzed. So, let's just leave it at that for that comment. Then, so we have Eusebius. Eusebius should be a pretty powerful, convincing source for all of this. And what does Eusebius say? Writing before 324 AD, records from a Syriac source that Thomas sent Thaddeus. Thaddeus is Addai, yeah? So in Syriac, Thaddeus, the apostle Thaddeus, is called Addai. And he was the first one to arrive to that area. One of the 70 disciples to preach in Edessa. Others dismiss this claim and argue for Tatian as the founder of the church in Persia. Samuel Hugh Moffat, under the title Tatian the Assyrian, writes that the first verifiable historical evidence of Christianity is provided by the life and work of Tatian, and that will be already in probably the second half of the 2nd century. After the middle of the 2nd century, that's right. So whatever conclusion we draw from these and other traditions, not only is there firm evidence for the existence of Christians in the area by 170 AD, there is also extensive evidence for the movement of Christianity eastward in the earliest centuries from bases in Arbela, in Atiabene and Edessa, in Oshoene. The chronicle assumes Christianity reached the satrapy of Atiabene by 100 AD. This will be a really early time. And Edward Sachau considers the tradition sound. So some of them could consider the tradition sound and some of them don't. One will have to see as to why, what is their bias and what is also their arguments, of course. According to Luke's account in Acts 2:9, those who responded first at Pentecost were Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia. Tradition also says many fled eastwards after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. One of the first Aramaic-speaking Christian centers might have been Adiabene, where the local ruling house had converted to Judaism and in about 40 AD. So that's pretty amazing. That's really close to the death of Jesus. This Jewish city-state had regular contacts with Palestine, and it seems possible that through this route Christianity reached Adiabene as early as the 1st century. With Adiabene as a possible refuge for persecution elsewhere, the number of Christians grew markedly so that by 235 AD they had more than 20 bishops and some 18 dioceses. Okay, so there was also a conversion of King Abgar in Edessa, Abgar is the 8th, in the 3rd century. So, and very important how the Aramaic language, which is the Syriac language, classical Syriac language, was kept because of Christianity. In fact, it's one of the most important Christian languages. Yeah, we're going to see it's beautiful. It's a beautiful language. I'm going to put a liturgy for you later. The revitalization of Zoroastrianism under the Sassanid rulers, as I said, brought with it a revitalization of the Pahlavi language of the Persians as well, whereas the church-established status facilitated their continued use of Syriac instead of Pahlavi. The Syrian churches of today all trace back their origin to the Christian communities that developed in Syria and Mesopotamia in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, especially to those that in this period used some variety of Aramaic rather than Greek as their primary language. Okay, so you can read the article. Yes, it's just the Chronicle of Arbela. Article talks here about the history of the finding of this chronicle and all the reference. And I have here the whole chronicle, which I'm actually going to read. And here I have the beginning of the Chronicle of Arbella. I'm going to read to you from it. And remember, this is a channel of, long video podcasts. I particularly love when I hear long video podcasts, and if you're looking for those videos that explain to you the whole history of the universe in 15 minutes and has 6 million views in YouTube, you can go to those. This one is documentation of the search itself. Yeah. So I have particularly never read this chronicle, but I find it really fascinating. So I'm going to start reading, and then I might tell you who the authors are and the translators, and you can look for the work yourself. And so let's do it. And you have asked me many times, beloved penis.
What kind of video is this?
Shall I say pinus?
Pinus like Aquinas, not penis like...
Well, it's Pinhes.
P-I-N...
Pinus. I would say pinus, no?
Pinus.
And you have asked me many times, beloved Pinus, to write down for you an account of all the bishops of our hyparchy, which is metropolis, and the martyrs who were killed because of their love for Christ, and all of those who earned a famous name in this world, and he who is ready to, so that the praise ascends to God and be a good ransom for us in heaven. You know, namely, that the story of our church bishops leads us to the foundation of the church, which is our Lord Jesus Christ, the awakener of our contemptive nation. And for that reason we love him with all our hearts. We must be namely the goal of our thoughts, which he is. And behind his love we must go along. And when it is the case that we do this, the Holy Ghost lives within us. And we will be temples for the Holy Trinity, which lives in us all. Their power is that this godly Trinity plants in us a vineyard and surrounds it with a fence and digs for us a winepress. A vineyard because we are the work of God, and he planted us and we are his property. Interesting. So we are seen as property of God here. It is namely written that he has come into his property. Interesting. So he's citing from Matthew 21:33, Mark 22:1, and Luke 29, and then John 1:11. So that's all these references to the vineyard. A vineyard because we are the work of God, and he planted us and we are his property. It is namely written that he has come into his property. A fence with which we be protected and guarded inside of him, that we will not be pierced by the claws of our enemies, hidden and open. The winepress due to the martyrs, which were called names, killed because of Christ, and pressed out like grapes through the feet of the faithless torturers. It was namely said through the godly David, "Because of you we are killed daily, and we are watched as sheep to prey." We will from here on speak with the power of God of the bishops and the martyrs. We plead through prayer for help from our kind God, that he, in his grace, forgives our mistakes and allows us the uncovered stories of the chancel of his glory. To him belong the honor and glory forever. So the chancel here is all chapter titles were added by Kawarau, which is the translator, the first translator. So here we have an enumeration of the bishops, and the first one was the Bishop Pekida of Arbela in the years 104, 114 AD. So that's really early history, which is beautiful. I find fascinating that the closer we get to Christ as to what is it that we know about the first Christians actually from original sources. And this is one. This is why I want to extensively read from the sources. I want to get a taste of what the actual real sources say. And of course, you have to always go to the scholars so that they explain to you and they translate to you what these first sources were. But I think it's important to read from the original to get the spirit of what these people were going through and saying. And here you can see already that what they were going through was much, or they have actually gone through in the past, is much repression. Yeah, because it's a reference to the martyrs first and foremost. So the first of the bishops, which the territory of Hedayab had, so let's see what is Hedayab. Hedayab is in Atia Bene, okay? So it's the territory of Assyria between the rivers Lucus and Caprus. It's the first of the bishops which the territory of Hedayab had is, according to Habel, the teacher Mar Pekida, who had a hand laid upon him by Adai the apostle, so Thaddeus the apostle, in his own person. This was the son of a poor man, whose name was Berri, and he was a servant of one of the Megushes. So the Megushes were Magians in the chronicle, not to represent just the priests, but any Persian of the old faith. Wow, okay. His son, however, from that time on, when he saw a miracle through which Adai the apostle woke a small girl, as she was being carried to her grave, and there was in her parents the movement in their hearts of the Holy Ghost, which has been stored in us through our Lord Jesus Christ. And he decided that he would be his student. Those persecutions he therefore received from his father and from his relatives, for the mouth could not retell, and an understanding could not be made. However, he stood firm against all of this in his attitude, and his parents locked him up in a gloomy house. But he had a helper which helped the door for him, which opened the door for him, and he escaped and ran and searched for the apostle. But he could not find him. And as it was said to him, he has gone to the mountain villages. He wished immediately that he go and be taught by him and be blessed by him. And as he reached him after many days, the saint was happy to take him where he went. And they say that after 5 years he laid his hand upon him and sent him into his land. And he began to preach among the herds of heathens and to perform great deeds and miracles like the apostle, and to bring many of the sheep into the pen of Christ. So the pen will be to the enclave of Christ, in which he converted them through the godly grace. And after 10 days he died, and his students, 10 years, after 10 years he died, and his students buried him in the house of his parents, who had changed their attitude and stuck with him. So the second bishop was Shemshon of Arbela, from year 120 to 123 AD. After 6 years came Masra, the bishop of Bet Zabdai, in the territory and Hedayab, which is Adiabene, with a caravan of traders. So trading was very important for the spread of religion in this area. So, yeah, interesting fact. And as he heard that a community of Christians was present here, he went secretly to them. And as he brought them to trust him, they led him into the house and told him that they have been without a bishop for 6 years, and called upon him to lay his hand upon Deacon Shemshon and ordain him as bishop. And he consented to the good wishes and laid his hand upon him, because he heard that he was of Deacon Pekida. And so he began to lead this godly community and let them live on grass of power, which means it's a reference to the Psalms, number 23:2. And we went out and began to preach to the villagers, who sat around in rings, worshipping the fire. And they threw in it small children during their great festival, which they called Shahrab Gamud. Okay, it's an ancient festival in Adiabene, when it is believed children under 5 were sacrificed in a bonfire. So what do we have to say about this part of the Christianization of this area? Well, all I can say about this bishop is that he had a pair of balls. And Abel the scribe reports about this festival as follows, because it seems to be true that that's what they did, right? It's not just the chronicle. It seems to be true that in this festival, actual children were sacrificed. So this is a testimony, once again, of the civilizing power of Christianity all over the world. Whatever you might think about that, it's a very interesting subject of study in terms of the justice and the truthfulness and the progress brought to civilization through that. Yeah, I'm not saying that they were right all the time. I'm just saying that this is a worthy study, and here is a testimony of the correctness of the Christianization of certain areas. And we're going to have the same thing with the Spanish in the 16th century with the Aztecs. Though many excesses were committed, also many abuses, incredible abuses, were averted by the appearance of the Spanish from the Aztecs, who were doing human sacrifices like non-stop. Okay, so when your attitude is like they went there and just killed the Indians, you're not taking the massive nuances into consideration. So, and Habel and the scribe reports about this festival as follows. This festival falls namely in the month of Ihar, which is roughly the month of May. And they gathered together from all areas to a large well. And after they bathed in it, they settled down and cooked and gave to their slaves so that they ate. They themselves, however, did not eat until they threw into the fire one of their small children. Then they took its liver and its kidneys and hung them up on 3 branches, which were there as signs of their festival. Afterwards, they shot many arrows into the sky and went back into their houses. Jolly good, bloody, brutal festival. Nice. And when he preached to them, so he went there while they were doing that and told them, fuck off, you don't do this. That's what he did. You gotta have a pair of balls to do that. It's like saying that this is wrong, and here I am with the right doctrine. I mean, not every preacher of Christianity went to places and was virtuous, but I will say that this one had a pair of balls. And this is quite, I think we're going to find that this is quite often the case in this area of the world at this particular time, because Christians were not in government. Yeah. So, and that is interesting, because as soon as you have the power, well, that's, you become the abuser, I guess, in many instances, not all of them. But this is interesting because Christians were rarely in power. They could be influential, but they were not the religion of the state in the Parthian, Sasanian, and these brutalizing, absolute garbage civilizations that we're looking at here. And I say that because I know there is plenty of space and time to analyze what someone was doing in the 2nd century. But since morality is not relative, you can make a judgment of any action done at any time in history. Yeah. And when he preached to them the length of 2 years, he baptized many of them. And the Christian faith spread out considerably through the virtues of Shemshon between 120 and 123 AD. But when the affairs became known to the princes who were there and the Megushe, so the Magi, they bound him, and after many torments they killed him. I'm shocked to hear about that. And this happened 7 years, says Habel the scribe, after Khusrau, grand king of the Arsacids, was besieged by Trajan, the Caesar of the Romans, which came and visited our lands. And it was Shemshon, the first martyr of our area. And he was raised to heaven. May the Lord help us through his prayers and ensure that we intimate his moral life. Okay, let's go to the next one. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole thing here. I'm going to read a lot of it. So, number 3, Bishop Ishak of Arbela. And we are now in 135 to 148 AD. That's quite long. So he seems to not have been killed that quickly. However, after him, this athlete, that's interesting. So athlete comes from Isaac, Moses, Genesis 22. Okay. This athlete of Christ was a bishop of many Christians which were available. Mar Ishak, Mar is saint. Yeah, when you hear Mar in the Syriac language, it means saint. Like in the monastery Mar Saba, which is one of the most magical places I have ever seen in my entire life. Absolutely unbelievable. Mar Saba in Palestine. Thank you very much. Mar Ishak, 135, 148 AD, a zealous and religious man who was brought into the manner of Ishak, which is Isaac. Sorry, I made a mistake in the last note. It's not, I don't know what it says there. This is Syriac, and also I can identify here Greek and Hebrew. I mean, how beautiful would it be to learn all these languages, you know, to have Greek, to have Syriac, Hebrew. We've lost so much, you know. They don't even teach us Latin and Greek in school. Never mind all these beautiful, very important languages. The people who learn this is mind-blowing. However, the godly will did not allow that he be pierced by the arrowheads of the evil, the enemies of everything holy. And also, so he instructed as a colleague without exhaustion. Constantine the first of Rome was the colleague. I don't understand this. And also, so he instructed as a colleague without exhaustion. However, the godly will not allow that he be pierced by the arrowheads of the evil, the enemies of everything holy. And also, so he instructed as a colleague without exhaustion. And in this time, so this must have been a disciple of him, Constantine the First of Rome. Constantine the First of Rome. Okay, so we might find out who that is. And in this time there was a man who was well known and well off, and they said that he was appointed by the kings to rule this region, and his name was Rahbakt. And when he heard of the calling of Mar Ishak, he came to him and asked him about his vows. And he welcomed it and said that he holds to them. And after many days he baptized him in a secret village on account of his fear of Vologeses, the second grand king of the Parthians. And through the influence of this saint, a Constantine of his time, I keep reading the notes wrongly, sorry. And through the influence of this saint, a Constantine of his time, which refers to Constantine I of Rome, the Christian commitment was spread to the villages which are around us. It's very important in the history of Christianity when this whole area of Christianity is destroyed by Islam or is taken over by Islam. Actually, some of the so Muslims actually were received much better than the Sassanids, because the Sassanids were, the Zoroastrians tend to be, not all of them, but they tend to be quite tyrannical against Christians. And when the Muslims came, they were at least from the book, yeah. And Islam had an evolution from its beginning. Hopefully, we're going to talk about that as well, which is really interesting because it wasn't so much a contrasting religion as opposed to Judaism or Christianity, because it actually stemmed from them. Yeah, the Nazareans, by the way. So we're going to talk about the Nazareans hopefully as well. So this world is fascinating, and very few people know about this. And I think it's becoming pretty apparent to me that this is very important to understand, and that Syriac Christianity cannot be ignored in order to get to the soul, the core, and the actual teachings of Christianity. And I don't mean that anyone should be a heretic or anything if you're a Christian, or Orthodox, or Catholic. I'm just saying that it shouldn't be ignored. That's all I'm saying at this point. Which are around us. And against him stood up the priests, the heathens, and endeavored that they change his mind. Yeah, good luck with that. And against him stood up the priests. So one of the things that happens with Christianity is that it's so close to truth, you know. Whether you think of it or not, it's really powerful. And this is like when people make the argument that it was just power spreading Christianity. Well, it's the power of what? Because why would so many people, normal people and also powerful people, be attracted by it? They must have seen that it wasn't just part of the culture, it did actually bring something new forth. There are elements from the culture that came from before, be it Hebraic or be it Greek, but it's not just that. We need to understand the depths of it and why it touched people so deeply, and why those martyrs, which were actual martyrs, will not bend down to the powers that told them, like, you shut the fuck up and you stop promoting this religion. There's a reason why it is successful apart from kings adopting it or emperors adopting it. And against him stood up the priests, the heathens, and endeavored that they change his mind. And as they labored without success, they decided that they will kill him so that their Megusdom would be saved. Megusdom, and then you can see here in the note. The original word for Megusdom, which must be someone in the priest class of the Parthians. Hebel, the teacher, reports in the following way as says, "They ordered the Megushes of their faith, which lived in the mountains. They shed their overrobes and dressed up and carried on like people of far lands and went to the saint of the Lord in the manner of travelers, who wished for a bite to eat and to stay there the whole night. And at the end of the night they should kill him and go back to their land. However, some of these, enemies of the exalted God and friends of the accursed Satan, decided that everything that which they had heard and were compelled as was said to them in secret was sacrilegious of the Megushes, their comrades. And they sent forth many servants and proclaimed to the Christian Rakbakt that there are nobles from far lands of the Romans who came to him and bid that they spend a night at his house. Hence it should suit him that he prepared lodging for them and a dinner which was fitting to their status." So they were basically going to betray him in his hospitality, which is in all cultures, especially ancient cultures, one of the worst things that you can do. It was considered utterly immoral to do such a thing, apart from the immorality of killing someone. But it was a much other bonus, quote unquote, if you did it when you were in their hospitality. As the saint of the Lord heard this, he planned post haste that he prepare everything that was fitting. And it pleased his soul in God that he was capable of proselytizing them to the covenant with the one God, the creator of heaven and earth. So they went there to kill him, and he actually converted them. And as everything was prepared, these envoys of Satan arrived, so that they rode on Bejeweled horses. Bejeweled horses. What is that? However, God, who is gracious to Israel and to those who are of simple hearts, quoting here from Psalms number 73, did not allow it that the evil arrows injure him, which they placed on their bowstrings. Psalms number 11. So this is taken from the Psalms. It could be that the story has been actually taken from the Bible, yeah? Then, as they were at the meal, to the saint of the Lord came a messenger from Ctesiphon. Ctesiphon is, the capital is very near Baghdad, which informed him on behalf of the Grand King Bologesses that he should come when he is willing without delay to Ctesiphon. With it the power of both of them would pacify the impetuousness of a rebel people which fell on land of the Kardu mountains. The mountains in Kurdistan, So we're talking about these areas, actually the actual Kurds who don't have a state right now. Is that area actually. It is their land that we're talking about in many cases. And plundered and decimated many cities. And that he rise up thereupon quickly and delivered his satanic guests to his brother, the heathen. And he himself promptly sent the messenger of the Grand King away with a few men of his household, and told his brother that he should amass troops and lead them in person and bring them to Ctesiphon. And as broken was the trap of the priests of malice, and the strong Rakbakt escaped, they poured their entire rage on the chief of the saints of the Lord, of the heroic and famous Ishak. 2 days later, they went to him and imprisoned him in a gloomy house, and they had the intent to kill him. But they feared an insurrection and the fierceness of the people, in which they held great fear of Ragbakt, the commander of the army. So on all these chronicles, what you see is like this interaction of some of the noble families, of the powerful families of the dynasties of the Parthian and the Sasanian Empire. And some of those actually became Christians. And it's very interesting to see that those who became Christian in this area of the world, they remained warrior-like. Yeah, so when they came to they became sort of pacified, but when it came to defend the faith, the new faith that they had adopted, and they were mocked and they were pushed to the edge, and they were, in another chronicle there is a kidnap of the family of one of them, and he just goes and destroys all of them. Yeah. So, and as through God the victorious Ragbakt heard the painful news, he gave the order that while he is in Ctesiphon, that they should release the servant of God and lead him out of prison and give him complete freedom. And he threatened with many oaths that he will kill anyone who stood against him and is not willing in this matter. And the prophet of God came forthwith freely out of the house of the prisoners. Ragbakt, however, the powerful man, remained 16 days in Ctesiphon. And from there he gave orders to his general Arshak that he amass many soldiers near him, some 20,000, all of them foot soldiers, and he set out against the rebels. God knows which satraps they crossed. So God knows which satraps they crossed on the march and how many difficult mountains they climbed as they came. Yeah, the mountains in that area, they're treacherous. And at the time of their meeting, and that's why some places there Christianity was held, like in Armenia. Armenia was pushed towards the mountains, yeah. In Armenia, there's this beautiful, beautiful city. I forgot his name. It's now in modern day Turkey, and they just abandoned it. They're not caring about it at all. And this was an incredible city. It was called the City of 1,000 Churches. And it's still impressive when you look at it. There's very few segregated churches that you can see in a barren land, yeah? But just looking at those buildings, the beauty of those ruins is really amazing. I forgot the name now. I hate to forget names, but I just did. At the end of the chiefs of the rebellion, who was named Kiso, had engaged Arshak in one of the mountain gulches. What is a gulch?
Gulch.
Gulches.
Spell it? You mean vultures?
Gulches.
With a G.
G-U?
Yeah. Gold.
L-C-H-E-S. Mountain gulches. Never mind. And he encircled them there. And for 3 days they led a hefty battle. But Arshak's soldiers became weak against the strength of their hunger and gave up hope of victory and began to flee. And the powerful Ragbakt went out of the camp of the soldiers and called his guard to him. And they climbed up the mountain like the eagle circling above his area. And here again there is a reference to the Maccabees number 1. So 1 Maccabees number 9, sorry. So all these stories, these chronicles, they're full of reference to the Bible. Yes, which means that whatever happens in reality was later adorned or was being made sense. I wouldn't say that it's not real, but it was being made sense through the scriptures, which tells us something very important that we need to understand, that all our history is imbued with scripture interpretation. Doesn't mean that the reality of what happened was parallel or equal to the scriptures, but it was tried to be made sense in that way. And when we think about it, this is what we always do, no matter what our world, our model of how to interpret the world and history is. We're always interpreting actions in history and making sense of that, the connection between them, so that we make sense of the whole, yeah, in a way that confirms our worldview. And the worldview of the Bible, the worldview of Christianity, has permeated great part of our interpretation of history, and therefore is part of our intrinsic way of going about things when we interpret anything. Yeah. And when we negate that, we lose a massive part of what we are. This is the reason why learning about Christianity and its history is so important, why I am undertaking that. Yeah. I don't have a final judgment. What you're seeing here is the process of me imbuing myself with all this data, so to say. Yeah. And it's beautiful. I'm reading this like, I'm loving this. So where was I? But Arshak's soldiers became weak, etc. So the rebels now, when they saw this, endeavored to descend down to the desert and took away all of Arshak's cities. And also when they heard that another barbarian people had crossed the sea, which where the sea in the Chronicle always refers to the Caspian Sea, not the Mediterranean, and came like thieves, and that they destroyed their cities and laid waste to them and took everything that they had by force, up to their women, they turned in haste and sought help for their land. When they arrived, they fought for 2 months until they overcame them and fought them back across the sea. Whatever the form of the sadness our entire land took at the time, when they heard the painful news about the death of Ragbakt, the inscriber was not able to describe. Many times the true Christians let their eyes overrun with tears for him and bemoaned him like David with Johanan in the Psalms 1, 25, 26. How did the man fall in battle? Jonathan, on your mountains are fallen. I am in mourning over you, my brother Jonathan. You were dear to me. And he who is capable of holding back their grief was Ishak, and the death of his helper. It's a bit late at night, so my reading is just really bad. The silence. I'm gonna read this again. I think this is beautiful. This is. Don't you think like this is amazing? Like this is like 6th century Syriac literature, you know? Like who the hell reads this, you know? I'm gonna read it.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I'm gonna say something. It's rude, okay?
I'm ready.
It's rude because the people who translated this made a big effort. And honestly, I haven't paid for this text. You know, I downloaded it. But come on, this has to be known, you see. And sometimes the authors, they're not paid very well. It's just like this sort of copyright nonsense, really. And the fact that this is available on the internet is fantastic. Because otherwise no one would buy. I wouldn't buy all these books, you know, all these books. By the way, I have bought this one. So I do buy books, okay? But if I want to have a freaking like library of 1,000 books, how on earth is that not legitimate? The more I download, the more I buy, you see? And I understand that what I'm reading right now, no money went to this person, but this might create interest. And it might create someone to say, hell, I actually want to buy the actual volume of what this guy is reading. The problem is, I'm not saying who wrote it, but look, I'm just going to do it. Fuck it. Okay, which page am I in? Number 6. Okay, this book is this. Just watch. And copy if you want to buy it, or if you want to get it, if you know how to. And just copy and get it and read it yourself and have it in your library. I'm sick and tired of going to the archive. It's like you can download it only for an hour. You know, that's absurd. Copyright is tyranny. It's nonsense. It's against creativity. It doesn't help anybody. Yeah? Because if you think that culture gets destroyed and that people who deserve to be paid are not being paid because of copyright, you couldn't be more wrong. Because it's just a question of business model. Yeah, what you think should be sold by the publishing houses could be sold by the actual authors when the business model changes and they do it in a different way, in a different order, from a different perspective. There's a lot of people now, creators, who actually get the money before they write the work because they are in demand. When there is demand, you see. It's the demand that actually activates the creative process. If you want to write about something that actually absolutely nobody is interested in, you will not sell a single book. Yeah? No matter how much marketing there is behind it. Yeah? And I know that people don't think like that, because I understand that through marketing, interest is created in something that is actually irrelevant and people fall for it. But it is actually fulfilling a demand that the people who fall for it have. It's just perverted, but it's perverted precisely by how the market works, which is no market. It's all based in tyranny. Okay? Copyright is tyranny, and it's immoral. And that's why I do this. And I'm not saying that the translators of this work shouldn't get any money. Yeah? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the whole scheme is just a scheme in order to funnel the funds towards those who actually don't deserve it. And that's the truth, yeah? Check Stephen Kinsella on these matters. He's brilliant, and he has a lot of experience with that. So I'm actually proud that I'm doing this, that I'm taking this book. I haven't paid a penny, and I have hundreds of them.
I'm proud of you too.
And maybe I shouldn't say this because you know, they could close the channel, it could even have legal consequences, but fuck you all, you know, if you think like that, if you think that is right. Anyway, here I am for Jesus. Jesus, all right. So after a short time, let's finish the third bishop. There's plenty
How many bishops are there?
I don't know. I think there's like okay. Let's see how many bishops there are.
How many bishops?
How
How
many-
many golf balls can you fit in a pelican's mouth?
How many golf balls can you fit in a pelican? So let's see. What's 19? Just 19? I thought it would be more. 20 bishops.
That's quite a lot of bishops.
We're number 3.
Okay.
But we're gonna. I mean, my guess is that the first ones are probably the most interesting because they're real pioneers and they were like fighting against child sacrifice, you know, which is like well done you know. We got to do the same thing. There's still child sacrifice around us, and they put it on TV, and we don't even understand that that's what's going on. I'm not saying that the child sacrifice is being shown on TV. I'm just saying that when they report on it, it's actually not done by those who are reported to have done it, but by actually powerful people. And the most famous cases, like in in Spain, the Alcázar case was actually done by powerful people. It wasn't done by the people who went to jail or they were said to have been killed or to have disappeared. It's nonsense. Anyway, okay, so copyright is not proper, has nothing to do with property rights, okay? Stealing is a great sin. This is not stealing, I can assure you that. The rebels now, when they saw this, endeavored to descend down to the desert and took away all of Arshak's cities. I have read this already. Jesus. Whatever the form, the sadness our entire line took at the time, when they heard the painful news about the death of Ragbarth, the inscriber okay, we're going to leave it at number 3. You can stop the video and read. My image is probably redundant here, so I'm gonna try to see. Let me see if I can I change this in real time? Camera, going here. Yeah. Alright, so you don't have now my image, which is completely, and you can read the text. I'm gonna put it here. You can stop the video and read the text. There was a seat vacancy, and after his death, our church without a bishop. After the 5th one, Bishop No of Arbela. This is so early in Christianity. It's just beautiful to know about this. Very few people know about this time and this place. Went to Jerusalem. The small boy mingled with Christians and was baptized through the power of godly grace. And his parents were returning to the east. Thai came to Hedajab, which is Satyabene, because there were many Jews there. And they were afraid of going back to their country because of the unending rebellion going in there. Always rebellions with these people. The boy, however, since he heard that Christians were prevalent here, went to Abraham and became his student. And through one of the most interesting developments here at this time is how the Talmud developed after Christianity started and the destruction of the temple, which they're not simultaneous, but the difference is just 40 years. So you have the beginning of Christianity with the death of Christ at 33 AD, and then you have the destruction of the temple of 70 AD by the Romans. So the diaspora happens and Christianity starts, both almost at the same time. And this dynamic is crucial, it's just so powerful to understand this. Because before what you had Judaism in their many denominations. But then you have the crucial arrival of Christianity at the same time when the end of the actual grounding of the whole religion of Judaism, which was the temple. And this becomes like, this is a fascinating history, fascinating. This this, I hesitate to say dialectic, right? But I think it's there. It's as a, like, you know, it's like two strings pulling each other very, very strongly. And then you have also the Roman Empire, the Greek culture. You have the appearance of Islam. That's why these three religions, they're in constant, you know, rotational battle, you know. It's very interesting. It's very, very interesting. Okay, so how can you see me again? Like, I want you to see me. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. This guy went to Jerusalem. So Bishop No of Arbela. And this was at the time when Adiabene was a Jewish kingdom. But the temple had already been destroyed. So now the parents of these religious monks stamped from the deserts of Anbar and went to Jerusalem. The small boy mingled with Christians and was baptized through the power of godly grace. As his parents were returning to the east, they came to Hedajab, to Adiabene, because there were many Jews there. And they were afraid of going back to their country because of the unending rebellion going in there. The boy, however, since he heard that Christians were prevalent here, went to Abraham and became his student. So Abraham must have been number 4. Yes, Bishop Abraham the first, which was followed by Abraham the teacher, which is the one I was reading about. Son of the honor-worthy Solomon. Okay, let's read about the 5th one, which looked interesting. And through fasting and continuous prayer, and through noticeably countless nightly service to God, he was brought to the highest level of holiness and was deemed worthy of godly display, through which he was capable of doing mighty deeds and miracles like the apostles. However, because of this, whosoever is capable of counting the wickedness and the persecution, he must suffer this from the unbelievers, especially the Maguses. So that's the Magi of the Parthians. This is the good part, that it is given to the apostles through the person of the entire Church of God. Remember namely the word which I have said to you. It is not the servant which is greater than the master. When they persecute me, they will persecute you. This is from the Bible, obviously. And furthermore, such have I said to you, that you are not angry. They will even hunt you out from our congregations. And the hour will come when everyone who will kill you believe that he will be brought as a sacrifice to God. This is from John 16. The church, therefore, is the holy kingdom of Christ on earth. I'm starting to believe that always more and more, because the savageness of the world outside of that seems to me pretty obvious. Not in every case, obviously, but... And not that Christians have always been nice, that's for sure also. But the balance is on its side, in my opinion. But this church is mixed with the wicked and unbelievers and Maguses and heathens. And at all times they wage war with them. But there is hope for us that they will be at all times glorious and victorious. Our Lord namely said, I have conquered them, the world. And even the gates of hell will be stronger than they. And the animosity which is between the church of Christ and the world will not have an end, except at the end of time, when the white corn will be sorted out from the rye grass, which will be thrown into the fire forever and be burned. But the holy Noah was reminded of all this, as they threw him into prison 5 times, and seas of joy overwhelmed him when they hit him with whips and chains, until his blood flowed, and he remained silent as a sheep for his shearer. In the end, however, God himself had the wish that he invoke his rage for his saint and rescue him from the hands of the unjust, that with it the word of David would be fulfilled. Quote, I was a child, but I did not see a righteous man who was abandoned. End quote. And one day the son of a rich and noble man from one of the towns in the country of Hedajab, that is Adiabene, whose name was Rasha, fell from the roof, and he broke his foot and injured his shoulder joint. And as this accident befell him, he was not in his house, but rather in the city of Arbela because of house business. And he went out with bitter cries, that with it he should see the end of his affair. The holy Noah was, however, at that time in that big village which sits on the Zaba, the river Zab. He fled from the poison of the Megushes and kept himself hidden there. And as Rasha arrived and saw his son ready to knock on the death's door, he abandoned his senses of the greatness of the pain, and he began to throw ashes on his head and in the interior of his house. Thereupon the saint of God went there, and he promised the housemaids that he and his son will be resurrected under the condition that they believe in Jesus Christ. And they answered him, If you give this beloved boy life again, we will do as you wish. And the saint prayed on it and said, Lord, God the Father, you have shown your power to the people and peasants. You, who through Moses has shown countless signs and lead out the Beni Israel. Through your great power, you, who through your prophets has shown to all people that you do not want the death of the sinners, but that they turn from their unjustness and lives, you who has awakened your beloved Lazarus, who had slept for 4 days, you who has said that everyone who believes in me, that he will achieve better than this. You, who through the power of your strength had the apostles proclaimed your name in every town and land, and planted your church and founded it on the unconquerable rock of Shemon Kepa. You, O Lord, look upon your servant, this small boy, who in his purity and in his silence believes in you, that you are the God of truth. And look mercifully on this group, who has gathered here and waits on your goodness. And judge this person who followed in your image and your likeness, and heal them from the sickness of their bodies. And upon his last words he made the sign of the cross on the boy. And immediately he stood up, healed from all sickness and weakness and free from every injury. And many heard of this miracle, and everyone gave God the honor which his glory showed through his body. And Rasha and his housemate fulfilled everything that they promised, and they received the baptism and led a holy life the length of their lives. But the saint of God, therefore, because he could not go back to the city of Arbela out of fear of the Megushes, remained in Rajshah's house. And he taught the Orthodox faith to all the village inhabitants. And he also went in the land of Nineveh and brought the name of Christ to many villages, which had not before heard of it. But on one day, children were playing in the proximity of that accursed tree. And note, a black snake was crawling on the tree. But the children, incited by the ghost of God, killed it with stones and ripped there the little blood that was in it. And it became evening. The inhabitants of the village went to that place to pray. But, oh great miracle, look, they saw blood. Immediately they turned out of fear of their God and began to lament. The saint of God, however, was present there and cut into the tree the sign of the venerable cross. And the tree vanished from there. But after many days they found it planted in the city of Dakuk. And they uprooted it, whose heathens and wanton, and they uprooted it, those heathens, and wanted to burn the saint and it, although it was living. So Kaduk, 75, Kaduk, south of Kirkuk in the road of Agdad. Not Baghdad, but Agdad. As they uprooted it, those heathens, and wanted to burn the saint in it although it was living. Then they thought that it is the way of pure evil, from the first to the last. But in that moment that they set fire with wood, the tree arose and planted itself in its place. And they said then, the wicked, one to the other, truly, our God doesn't want us to kill this man, because in the hour in which we want to burn him, this God came, and it appeared through this sign that he says to us that we are not to kill him. We can no longer set ourselves against our God, who shows his will in his empathic manner. This man compares to a rose, which when much rain falls on it, blooms beautifully. When, however, the sun comes, it becomes limp. But after, when rain falls on it, is it even bigger than before? And this man was also withered. But God wanted to rescue him from our hands, and he cast rain over him. We will let him free and give him freedom, that with it he does not bring us under the foot of God. Now the saint of God, when he saw that they were busy with such deliberations, began to show them the truth of the Christian faith, and many of them on the other. And under the count of an election they found a new village leader, whose name was Rasmarduk. Now, through zeal, clothed with God, was the thorn bush of the Megusham withered out of every village, and the faith in Jesus Christ conquered it and was planted against it. And he distanced them from those gods of lies. They have ears, but do not hear. They have mouths, but do not speak, and have eyes, but do not see. That's from the Psalms again, 115, 5, 6. And in a few months the Holy No baptized the collected inhabitants and remained there an entire year. So he ruled many Christians of our hyparchy, our metropolitan, 16 years. And there was a seat vacancy, and you have Habel, These are beautiful stories from each and every bishop of this. Very impressive. Like, this is just amazing. Okay, let's leave it there now. We'll next get to the next document. So now we are going to get back to Timothy the First, as we started this video. And I'm going to talk about this fabulous book and this incredible edition of this scholarly work in Italian of Vita e Studi di Timoteo I, Patriarca Cristiano di Baghdad, Vittorio Berti, the Vittorio Berti. This is an Italian scholar who has written a work about Timothy I in Italian. And I'm going to just talk about it briefly, summarize it in English, so that you can see what it's all about. It's a really good work, and I'm going to start talking about first what it is, this book about. So it's the intellectual biography of Timothy I, who was the patriarch of the Syriac church, as you know, of Baghdad in Seleucia, Ctesiphon, between 780 and 823 AD. So the scope of the studies during the Iraq of the first Abbasids and its Christian community, the Syriac Christian community. So it's from the beginning of the 8th century up to the beginning of the 9th century. The questions that it's going to address is how did Syriac Christians adapt from an intellectual perspective to the Islamic Abbasid political restructuring, its impact on monastic culture, transmission strategies to keep the knowledge, the Syriac Christian scholastics relations with the Ummah, which is the elective body of the Muslim power, and reactions and strategies of Christians as a minority. Okay, so we have here that with Timothy I, Christianity reaches its greatest extension to the four corners of Asia. This might come as a surprise that in a Muslim caliphate, Christianity reaches its greatest extension. This does not mean that it was without difficulty and without martyrs and without repression. Yeah. But actually, Timothy I, when talking about the Abbasids, he actually does praise them in the sense that even if you were to be living in a Constantinian Christian, under a Constantinian Christian government, where Christianity is the official religion of the state, for him, even having the martyrs and the repression from the Muslims, that was better in terms of doctrines, because Muslims didn't get into the doctrinal matters of the Christians. They just simply tolerated them, or they didn't. Yeah. So, and from the blood of the martyrs, his view, that was actually an extra strength for the doctrine, for the doctrinal religious basis of what the religion actually should be. Yeah. So why was Christianity tolerated particularly by the Caliphate? It's because the particular Christology of the Syriac fathers, it was a I don't know how to pronounce this, a Bificide doctrine in which the verb didn't suffer on the cross, only the man Jesus suffered on the cross. And also the role of transmission of Greek culture to the Arabs. This is very important. This was actually done by Christians. When we hear about the Arab, mathematical contributions and also the translation of the Greeks that were done in the Arab world, this is true, but many of them stemmed and started from Christianity. Yeah. Also, we have that also in architecture, like for example the the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem was actually done from Byzantine models of architecture. Yeah, so the Christian influence into the culture of Islam is very, very evident. And also the school of Bashos. We're going to see what that is. So the book is divided in 4 parts. There is an intro about manuscripts, which is very technical. We're not going to get into that, but basically he analyzes the distribution and of the letters. So this is a book about the letters of Timothy I, of which there were more than 200, and I think we keep now around 90 of them. So we have 4 parts in this book, which is the first 2/3 of the first one will be about the first 2/3 of the 8th century, the reform of Babai the musician, the government of Maranheme, of Hatara, and the figure of Bar Sasandad. The second will be about the early life of Timothy I in Seleucia, Ctesiphon, and in Baghdad. So when the Umayyads came to power, they actually founded Baghdad, the city of Baghdad. So it's a very new city at this point. And although Timothy is called from Seleucia, Ctesiphon, which is 2 different names of calling the same city, I think he moved to Baghdad after. I will correct myself if this is not correct later. So Timothy's relation, also number 3, Timothy's relation with his previous school and the intellectual formation of Timothy himself. As I said in the introduction, we go through the Patriarch's epistolary. This is very technical if you want to read the book. If you're very technical on these matters, you probably already speak Latin or Italian, so you go for it. So in chapter 1, it's called the Ecclesian and Scholastic Background, in which Timothy lived. So the previous decades from the appearance of Timothy I as this very, very crucial, important figure in the Syro-Eastern Church, and the Abbasid turn. It gives you a framework of it. So the episcopal structure and relationship with the secular powers is very important. And he has cited a letter to Marmaron, which is Marmaron is a monastery in Lebanon. Here you can see it. Here's a spectacular, beautiful place. On the dangers of the church to live under Christian sovereigns, as I said before, how their inclinations can affect orthodoxy. So orthodoxy is more important for Timothy I, and he will even praise the fact that they have to go through martyrdom in order to affirm, so that's favorable for them to affirm orthodoxy. If you look at the chronicles of and the stories regarding the birth of Christianity in this part of the world, it's all like a Sassanid lord who discovers Christianity, and then he becomes ascetic, non-violent, but then they get attacked, and then he becomes forceful or violent as well. We're going to get to those. They're very interesting chronicles and legends that we're going to explore of this very, very badly known time of Christianity, time and place, I would say, and how Muslims had never constrained the Eastern Church in matters of faith. Yeah, talking further about the letter here. So Muslims had never constrained the Eastern Church in matters of faith. So he saw that as a very positively. So, however, paradoxically, according to Timothy, the faith is maintained after martyrdom in Persia, and there is doctrinal benefits in staying out of the Constantinian paradigm. So Baghdad was the center of power with the Abbasid Caliphate, and gives the Nestorians, badly called Nestorians, that's why it's here in quotes, are reconvening with the center of power. The chronicles of the time, however, present an aggravation of the political attitudes of the Caliphate towards Christian communities. Yeah, so the Abbasids were actually not very nice in how they treated the Umayyads. I mean, the Umayyads weren't very nice either, but the Abbasids actually, they had this event where they gathered all the Umayyan family members who were left after the rebellion, and the Abbasids took power and in the Muslim world, and they just killed them all. Yeah, so they invited them to their home and killed them all, which is actually in many cultures, this is actually one of the worst things in moral terms that you can do traditionally. I'm not saying that there is all bad with Islam. I'm not going to get into that cliche kind of talk, yeah, because we're seeing here that, for example, Christians did prefer the Islamic rule to the Sasanian rule, for example. So Theophan in his chronicle specifically remarks the repressive character of the caliphate. However, the chronicle of Tsuknin emphasizes the vexing campaign of Al-Masur, who was the second caliph of the Abbasid dynasty. But this time he did it through taxes mainly. Yeah. And as always, as we know, taxes are theft and evil. With the Eastern Church, along the changes in power, the Sasanian, the Umayyad, the Abbasid, has a continuity in two factions. So this is more now internally, talking about the dynamics of the Christian community in this whole area of the world. And there were two divisions, one of land-holding Persian aristocracy and laicity, how do you pronounce this? Laicity intellectual at court, yeah, which they had an interaction and also conflict. And we have also a division in the sense of interior and exterior, and Persian and Aramaic, added to the complex interactions with the different powers of late Sasanian Empire and early Islam. This gives rise to a structure of multiple centers centered around the bishop and also considered national in ethnic terms in many cases, but above all religious. So ethnicity was, according to some authors, connected to religiosity, so to the religion to which you belonged. Yeah, a poly-center system that gives rise to the bishop, the monastery, the school. Yeah, very strong centers of learning in the Christian communities of this time. And it gives rise to a hierarchical elites within the Christian elites, which will be connected to the Muslim power and will provide services for them. And so there is a professional class and also an administrative class. And we will keep exploring the aspects of this, exploring from this beautiful book of Vittorio Berti. If you speak Italian, I recommend you buy it because it's heavy, beautiful, it's very well researched, full of there's probably very few people who's gone deeper than this Italian researcher on this part of the world and this time in history regarding his Christianity. Next, the schools. So we're now going to touch briefly about the life of the schools of the Syriac church in the 8th century, which is the time of Timothy I. There is a striking number of Syriac learning centers in the 8th century. Of primary education was very important. It was given in the village or nearby monasteries. It was funded after the monastic reform by Abraham of Kashgar. Is of great impact is the liturgy and the songs, very important in the education of the kids, which is the basis of the Syriac Orthodox Church. Kids learn the Psalms by heart, also the Credo, and they had warnings against heresies during their education. Higher instruction was paid by the community, and it was managed by the scholastic class. In the 8th century, so in the 8th century, it's going to already be different than in the Sassanid times. Yeah, remember the Muslims conquered this area in the 7th century. And in the context of Timothy, we're talking about the 8th century. We had before the Nisibis school, and now it's less present in the area. And now in the 8th century, in Ctesiphon schools, Timothy was educated in one of them, specifically in the Bashos near Mosul, present-day Mosul. So if we go to the next one, so this education preserves many characteristics of the paideia of late antiquity, but with faith at its core. So it comes from the classics, but it's Christian. Its conception explained by grounds of the foundation of the schools by, let me see if I can pronounce this name, Badhat Bashaba of Hulwan in the 7th century, describes the grounding of those schools, which is first school will be God teaching to Adam. The second one will be from the covenant with Israel, in which already some masters can teach other people. And other schools also have influence but have altered the divine teachings, like the Greeks and the Persians. And then Christ renews the first school. The first school given from God directly to Adam is renewed by Christ according to the grounds of the foundation of the schools by Badhat Shaba of Hulwan. So this is important because what we see here is that there is a grounding, there is a reason for the learning that is as ancestral as it gets. And at the same time, it is given the methodology, as we are going to see here, of late antiquity, very influenced by the Greek learning. So education is to give the image of the world, to give a worldview, and this worldview come as a metanoia, which means to a return to the correct way. So we have fallen humanity who is going to be corrected by this education through Christ, through returning to the first school, which was the very school of God teaching to Adam directly. Okay, so as a grounding for an education, it doesn't get any deeper than this. So the model was late Alexandrian Platonism, interestingly, with the 7 liberal arts, the trivium or lower studies, the grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic. This was given priority over the quadrivium and preeminence and in biblical exegesis. So there was a focus on biblical studies, but also the quadrivium was taught, or higher studies, which will be arithmetic, geometry, astrology, and music. There was some different degrees that I have written here in Italian, but it will be doctors, lecturers, master of compilations, master of scriptures, interpreter. And this was all influenced by the Antioch school of hermeneutics of the 5th century, 4th and 5th century. And the maximum representative will be Theodore of Mopsuestia. Also, there was the figure of the researcher, which gave wider knowledge coming from the Greek classical knowledge and Christian knowledge as well of science, geography, logic, and medicine. So apart from the schools, we have the monastic presence, which was very important in this area of the world before Timothy I. During the Umayyad and Abbasid times, the monastic institution is surprisingly dynamic. They were small and guided by the rule of Abraham of Kashgar, which was a monastic reformer of the 6th century, and centered around Mount Isla, Mount Isla is actually a rig of mountains where there were many, many monasteries. Very few remain active today. Here we have more Augin in the photograph. It's one of the very few monasteries still active today at Mount Isla, and it's near Nisibis. And the rest of all of them are ruins. There are very few which are actually active today. These monasteries had Egyptian influences from what is called the Lavriotic realm of type of monasteries. I'm going to explain now what that is. And it was very influenced by Evrachius Ponticus, which we're going to talk about this monk in a minute. But in monastic life exists the Zenobitic monasticism, which is by a given rule and its tendency towards the community. And you have the Anachorite monasticism, which is the solitary, typical ascetic monk. The Lavriotic monasticism, what it means is that it is one between the two. Yeah, this was important at the time in order to tackle some of the heresies of the time, and they found this middle way through the rules of Abraham of Kashgar, of whom we're going to also talk about specifically. So it is from the area of Nisibi, which is near the, so what is the frontier today between Turkey and northern Syria. And therefore, these two traditions of the schools and the monasteries stem from the Persian church, and they were very important in the institutionalization of the Persian church. So the double development then of the schools and monasteries comes in hand with the second Hellenization of the Church of Mesopotamia. So on the one hand, we have uniformity because of the conferred importance of the formation of the elites, of the Christian elites, that is, as they study Greek culture in translations. So again, this whole translation that comes from the Arabs actually comes from the Christians that were there before in the Hellenistic period. And this could be seen as a second Hellenistic period in which is studied also pagan culture and Christian culture, both. On the other hand, there was no constructed in a linguistic platform. Remember that the main language for the Christians there was Syriac, not Greek, but translations were very important, and they did know Greek apparently. And common experience of all the intellectual and monastic centers. So a great variety of sensitivities and options and elections existed with the different schools and monasteries. And Timothy I will have to grapple with that. There were some controversies at the time that were very important in terms of Christology. We have the Antiochian theology influence, which will be the main Orthodox influence that in this area of the world, actually they adopted other types of Christology. Okay. So this is important because we still have that today in the so-called Nestorian theology and Christology. So let's go now to talk about Evagrius Ponticus, which was a monastic figure of the 4th century that influenced the monastic life of the Christians in Mesopotamia. He is from the 4th century, and he became a monk at the monastery of Rufinus and Melania the Elder, and he went to Egypt. So this monasticism in Mesopotamia will be very influenced by the monasticism of Egypt. Yeah, we'll have one in St. Margaret, one of the main monasteries still today active at the foot of Mount Sinai. Is an incredible place. So he spent the remaining years of his life in Nitria and Kelia, these are monasteries in Egypt, and marked by years of asceticism and writing. He was the disciple of Basil of Caesarea, very important fathers of the church, Gregory of Nazianzus, and Macarius of Egypt. So we're going to see that he was in the Second Ecumenical Council of 381, and he was there present despite that his master Gregory of Nazianzus left prematurely. So he was a very important scholastic of the time, but he chose monastic life. He went to a monastery first in Jerusalem, and then he joined the Cenobitic community of monks in Nitria in Lower Egypt in 385. After some years, he moved to Kilia, to another monastery in Egypt. There he spent the last 14 years of his life pursuing studies under Macarius of Alexandria and Macarius the Great, who had been a disciple of Antony the Great. Antony the Great is one of the great monastic figures of Christianity, and lived in the monastic colony of Scetis, about 25 miles away. Sceticism probably comes from this place, the colony of Scetis. So Evragius lived an ascetic life, quite extreme. He ate only once a day and did not consume fruit, meat, or vegetables, and he became sick because of that. Also, he did not sleep more than a third of the night and devoted much time to contemplation and prayer. He wrote a lot, although a lot of it has been lost, and it was conserved only because it was translated into Syriac. He was highly educated, as I said, and he's recorded a list of Desert Fathers, of which he is actually part of it, of that tradition of the Desert Fathers. So Evagrius rigorously tried to avoid teaching beyond the spiritual maturity of his audiences. When addressing novices, he carefully stuck to concrete practical issues that he called practicae. He said, I cannot write about all the villainies of the demons, and I feel ashamed to speak about them at length and in detail, for fear of harming the more simple-minded among my readers. So his more advanced student enjoyed more theoretical contemplative material in the Gnostica. So he had the Practicae and the Gnostica. The most prominent feature of his research was a system of categorizing various forms of temptation that later Pope Gregory I will codify in the 7 deadly sins. He was also against the passions, which brought some problems with orthodoxy because he was quite extreme in that regard. So he was considered not a heretic, but on the verges of it. And Evragius, interestingly, taught that tears were the utmost sign of true repentance, and that weeping, even for days at a time, opened one up to God. Okay, so as I said, there were some accusations of heresy because of he was close to Origen doctrines, and Origen was condemned by the church, and some esoteric speculations. However, he had influence in the Syriac and the Armenian church, and he survived through translations and some of these 6th century Syriac manuscripts still survive today, which is quite amazing. He had influence in the Syriac world to Isaac of Nineveh, which is a later monastic figure in the Syriac church, and so on and so forth. You can have a look. This is just a Wikipedia article. You have here some further reading that you can do about him. I hope I can do it. If I have the time, I would love to explore this figure a little bit more. And we're going to go now to other format here. Let's go to the website. So we have one of the figures that created controversy. We have been talking about the variety, the cultural variety that exists in the Syriac church at this time. It wasn't just a uniform Catholic type of church. And one of the controversies was created by Henana of Adiabene. And there was a Christological dispute that I think is important to mention. Theodore of Mopsuestia, which was a previous father, held that union of Christ's 2 natures, divine and human, is manifested in a prosopic union. Henana, on the other hand, favored the concept of hypostatic union of the two natures. So he will be closer to orthodoxy, actually, as specified by the Council of Chalcedon in 451. So the Council of Chalcedon is the one that marks the separation of the Syriac Church and the Orthodox Church. Accordingly, he believed in God's suffering on the cross, impossible with a hypostatic union between the two natures. Those Christological controversies were reflected in a debate between pro-Chalcedonian supporters of one pneuma, Christology, and pro-Antiochian supporters of two pneuma, Christology. Pneuma in Syriac term is translated hypostasis. Hypostasis is the translation would be person. The divide between two groups was worsened by the interventions of the part of the West Syriac Miaphysites. Henana's one quoma theology was attacked by Babai the Great, which was a great reformer of the Syriac Church later. So just to see that there is a Christological differentiation, and these differentiations, these differences are not irrelevant for today's way about thinking about what's going on. So Christianity is really important that we delve into the theological issues because they connect with everything else. They do. Yeah, it might seem incredible for many people, but these medieval disputes that seem to be they seem to be disputing about nothing that is really of relevance and important, actually translates into what we are. Yeah, when we talk about what Christ was, we are talking about the connection between us as humans and the divine. And these conversations are very important because the whole conception ripples down into conceptions about what we are going to think about many other issues. So exploring this aspect of theology, philosophy, etc. is actually very relevant, and is very relevant today. So Abraham the Great of Kashgar was the great reformer of the Syriac monastic life. He was the father of the Assyrian monastic revival of the 6th century. He's a doctor and saint in the Assyrian Church of the East. He was born in Kashgar in Persia around 492. He left there to preach the gospel at Al-Hira, living there to study monastic life at Scetis. Monasticism was very popular in the early Syrian Mesopotamian Christianity. Some held the view that only a life of celibacy could lead to salvation. Initially, all monks and nuns were hermits, but in about 350, Mark Augin is the monastery that I showed you just minutes before. Founded the first Cenobitic monastery of Mesopotamia in Mount Isla, above the city of Nisibis, partnered upon the Egyptian model. Soon there were many monasteries. There were many monasteries in this part of the world, in the frontier between southern Turkey and modern northern Syria. But at the Synod of Beth Labat, the Assyrian Church of the East decided that all monks and nuns should marry. Wow. Obviously, this was in order to please the Zoroastrian rulers who held family life sacred. The decision severely weakened the church. The decision was reverted later in 553. In 571, Abraham founded and governed a new monastery in Mount Isla. This became the famous monastery called the Great Convent. The rules were established in 571 and were published in those of Dadisho, his successor. So Abraham died in 586. The third abbot of this monastery was his student Babai the Great, who succeeded Mark Dadisho. Born to a family of humble means, Abraham's feast day is celebrated the 6th day after the Epiphany. Babai the Great is mentioned in the book about Timothy I by Vittorio Berti. And let's read a bit about him. Babai the Great, who was called also Babai the Musician. Let me get some battery here. so we don't have to interrupt the video. There you go. Babai the Great was an early church father of the Church of the East. He set several of the foundational pillars of the church, revived the monastic movement, and formulated its Christology in a systematic way. He served as a monastic visitor and coadjutor with Mar Abba as unofficial heads of the Church of the East. After Catholicos Gregory until 628 AD, leaving a legacy of strong discipline and deep religious orthodoxy. Okay, so let's hear about Babai's Christology. The main theological authorities of Babai were Theodore of Mopsuestia, of whom we're going to talk about now, and Diodorus of Tarsus. He also relied on John Chrysostomus, the Cappadocian Fathers, and of Ephraim the Syrian. Ephraim the Syrian, we're going to talk about this guy, he's a really great poet, which were also accepted in the West. In his exegetical methods, he synthesized between the rational Theodore and mystical writers like Evagrius. And most important, instead of breaking with Theodore because of some extreme interpretations of his teachings, like others did, Babai clarified his position to the point that differences with Western Christology became superficial and mostly an issue of terminology. His Christology is far less dualistic than the one Nestorius seems to have presented. Babai, in the Book of Union, teaches tu gnome, nature, essence. The Miaphysite West Syriac Church uses the word to mean hypostases, which are unmingled but everlastingly united in one parsopa, from Greek prosopon, person, character, identity. It is essential to use the Syrian terms here and not any translations because the same words mean different things to different people, and the words must be accepted in the particular sense of each. In Greek Christology, hypostasis is used specifically to refer to what would correspond to Babai's parsopa, and oson would correspond to gnome. In the period in which Babai and others formulated their respective Christological models, words such as hypostasis and oson had less specifically fixed definitions. Thus, it was possible for two individuals to honestly use a single term to mean two distinctly different things. According to Jaroslav Pelikan, Syriac was a richer and more complex language than either Greek and Arabic, and it allowed for more precise distinction. Interesting. To Babai, Christ is both God and man, but he could not tolerate any form of theophaskism, the belief that God suffered, be it the divinity itself, the Trinity, or one of the hypostases of the Trinity. According to Babai, Cyril of Alexandria stood at the root of simple theophaskism, as professed by the Miaphysites, and the Emperor Justinian I at the root of composite theopaskism. The Church of the East could accept expressions like Christ died, the Son died, but not the Word died, even not the Word died in the flesh. In the 6th century AD, Mar Babai wrote the Shobokta, or Hymn of Praise. Explaining the theology of the Church of the East, he writes, "One is Christ, the Son of God, worshipped by all in two natures. In his Godhead begotten of the Father, without beginning before all time. In his humanity born of Mary, in the fullness of time in a body united. Neither his Godhead is of the nature of the Mother, nor his humanity of the nature of the Father. The natures are preserved in the pneumas, substance, in one person of one sonship. And as the Godhead is three substances in one nature, likewise the sonship of the Son is in two natures, one person. So the Holy Church has taught." So that's his Christological credo. This all comes from Theodore of Mopsuestia. Theodore of Mopsuestia was a Christian theologian, a bishop of Mopsuestia. So you can see the richness of this whole hermeneutics, yeah? And this is important We are ignorant about these issues, and we shouldn't be. This is first Christianity. It marks our culture. It marks the culture of the West, of the East. We have that in common, and we have to explore it. We have to know about it because it's very relevant to what trickles down in terms of morality, politics, etc. So, here we go. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video, which is going to start right now. And we are now going to talk about the church and society in Adiabene in the first half of the 8th century. We have already spoken about Adiabene quite extensively before, over the previous centuries, before Timothy I lived there. Adiabene was the seat of the Metropolitan of the Eastern Church. It has a couple of dioceses. I love saying these names because I never heard of them, at least many of them. The Diocese of Bet Muhadra, Marga. We're going to have Thomas of Marga talking in a book that talks about all these patriarchs of the Eastern Church. Nineveh, which of course we know. This is Nineveh. This is actually one of the doors, the Mishki Gate, Assyrian. Yeah, this is way before Christianity. The great city of Nineveh. And this monument, by the way, does not exist anymore because in the other image you can see the ISIS animals destroying unbelievably valuable, not just monetarily of course, but culturally, monuments that were in Mosul, which is an absolutely unbelievable fact of our modern life, where we turn into animals. And this is the kind of stuff that religious peoples do these days instead of serving God and serving others. So that's, of course, not everybody does that, I know that. But this is the fruits of Western governments' politics, yeah? This comes because of the connection and... Okay, let's leave that because that's another matter. We'll talk about these things in other videos. So with the Umayyads, the Muslim dynasty, they had the valley of Gavira, which was the province of northern Mesopotamia. So Adiabene gets integrated in the province of northern Mesopotamia, which during the Umayyads, it was called Gavira, and the region was under the valley of Gavira. However, the dioceses, the Christian diocese, retained previous Sassanid administrative system. There was a great urban development in Mosul. There were great urbanistic projects during the 8th century. And interesting too that we can talk about how the taxes were collected and why some of these groups remain relevant when the Muslims came into the area. So Mosul actually depends on Christians and all Sassanid administrative structures to run the government. And those structures were actually run by Christians. So Christians are culturally, administratively very important, although of course they're going to be supplanted by the new elites that emerge from the new regime. However, as we are going to see, as we have already seen, Timothy is actually happy that Christians are under the Muslims, much better than the Sassanids, and that's because the creation of martyrs. Actually, those governments are not going to get involved into matters of faith, and a lot of the dispositions that these Christians had against the Chalcedonian Council, for example, they feel free to explore those options because they are not under a Christian government that unifies the faith in a monolithic way. I am not saying that one or the other are good or bad. I'm just because it all depends on what is truth. Yeah. but that's the reality of the area at the time. So the structure of the society in the inland, there were many Christians, yeah. So, and also the old Sassanid structure held back the income of the taxes. So the church had been involved in these administrative tasks, and the dynamic readjustment of the Arab new elites and the old Sassanid and Christian elites will happen. So there is a correlation here with the nobility, which were called the Shanigan, which many of them were Christians, and also important, the deacons, so land nobility, which were favorable to Christians, and Christians were favorable to them, as stated of Thomas of Marga in his book that we're going to see is fascinating. So that is the context in which Timothy I was educated. And there was a very important monastery called Bet Abi, from which many of the patriarchs and many of the educational institutions of the time emerged, the Christian, that is. We have Isho Yab III, the patriarch in the 7th century. And just to reflect here that these two, for example, the Martirio Saadona, there was a controversy on Christology. Not all of them had the same Christology. Martirio Saadona was a non-Chalcedonian Christologist, if you can say that. And then, so Bet Abi was influential in the whole segment around Mosul and the Seleucid-Ctesiphon area. So it was central to the central government of the church, which was in Mosul, in the area of Mosul, but it was influential in the area of Seleucid-Ctesiphon, which was where the new central government was going to be based, or at least near Baghdad, where the central government was going to be based with the Abbasids. So that's the mark of the influence of the Eastern Christianity, this monastery, and also was the bastion of Christianity of the region at the time. A typo here should be THE. So this is Mar Matai, is an actual monastery of the today. Just to visualize a little bit, like this monastery doesn't exist anymore. Bet Abi doesn't exist anymore. Probably existed until the 16th century, and we have a modern version of those monasteries that will be now in the same area around Mount Isla, as we spoke yesterday. So Timothy will be its greatest example of the success of this dynamism of Christianity and the models of administration and education that it engendered. So we're going to go now to the next. Now we here. Let's go to preview. There we go. You can't see me now, but doesn't matter. So this is a great book, Book of Governors, the Historia Monastica of Thomas, Bishop of Marga, makes a relation of all the, and we're going to read a little bit. This is a 1893 edition of this book with the Syriac text. Syriac looks really beautiful. Only I can't speak it at all, so we're gonna have to, let's read a bit of the preface of this book. So the object of the present work is to give in a convenient form the complete Syriac text of the Book of Governors, together with an English translation and necessary notes. The Book of Governors, better known as the Historia Monastica of Thomas of Marga, was written in the Syriac language in the first half of the 9th century of our era. Its author, Thomas, was originally a monk in the famous Nestorian monastery of Bet Abi, which was founded at the end of the 6th century by Jacob of Lashom, the modern Lassim near Kirkuk. Bet Abi was practically an offshoot of the great monastery of Mount Isla, near Nisibis, where the first Christian ascetics of Mesopotamia, under the direction of Mar Augin of Clisma near Suez, established themselves in the early part of the 4th century. So this is in Egypt. So remember, Egyptian monasticism had an influence in the Mesopotamian monasticism. It was a building half fortress, half monastery, and it stood in a forest, hence the name, House of the Forest, upon a mountain peak between the two valleys of the right bank of the great Zab River. This monastery had been endowed by large estates and many possessions by several Persian noblemen. Again, the connection between monasteries and the noblemen has been pointed out, and to it was given the proud title of the King of Monasteries. Its society generally contains several members of the noble Persian families. The monks of Beth Abi were renowned for their learning, and under the shadow of its walls, the revision of rearrangement of the Hudra, or service book, for all the Sundays of the year were made, and the famous recension of the Syriac version of the Paradise of Palladius was completed. Attached to the monastery was a fine ecclesiastical library in which were preserved copies of histories and other works which are no longer extant. 4, if not 5, of the patriarchs of the Nestorian Church were educated at Beth Abi, and during the period of which we have any written records of its existence, that will be from 595 to 830 AD, at least 100 of its sons became bishops, metropolitans, and governors of Nestorian dioceses in Mesopotamia, Arabia, Persia, Armenia, Kurdistan, and China. Thomas, afterwards Bishop of Marga and Metropolitan of Beth Garmai, entered Beth Abi in the 9th century, and for a few years he acted as secretary of Abraham the Patriarch and Catholicus, who sat at Seleucia during the 9th century. He was a diligent student of the accounts of the lives of famous Nestorian ascetics who had been educated in or connected with Beth Abi, and having acquired an intimate knowledge of all matters concerning their lives and triumphs while they lived there, and of the details of their subsequent careers, he was persuaded by the monks severally and collectively, and especially by his friend Abd Isho, to write a history of their monastery and of its past inmates. After many entreaties, Thomas undertook the work, and by making use of histories which are no longer extant, and of the traditions which he collected from aged men who were then living in Marga and other places, he produced a narrative which forms a history of the Nestorian monasticism and asceticism in the countries east of the Tigris for nearly 300 years, and which is also a most precious supplement to the history of the Nestorian Church during the period of its existence, of which little is known. He describes at some length the occasions upon which the Nestorian Church came into contact or conflict with the Persian kings, and he casts some new light upon events and contemporary history. Okay, let's go a bit further. The geography. Let's jump the biography. It's around Atia Bene and also Nisibis. It's possible my chief aim being productive. Okay, so an attempt has been made to put together a series of facts concerning the origin and growth of Christian asceticism in Mesopotamia, which will, it is hoped, be useful to the student, for they bear directly upon the period which immediately precedes that with which Thomas, Bishop of Marga, begins his story. A brief account of the founding of the monastery of Rabban Hormuz at Al-Kosh, based upon new information, has also been added. In places where the facts given by Thomas, Bishop of Marga, could be advantageously supplemented, the texts of contemporary letters by the Patriarch and Catholicus, Isho Yad, we spoke about Isho Yab III of Atia Bene, has been given. His letters concerning the apostasy of Sadona and the schism in the Persian Nestorian Church are of the first importance for the history of these events. Remember, we spoke about Sardona, which was the non-Chalcedonian Christologist. Yeah, I don't know if it's a Christologist is correct. That's just so his Christology will not adhere to the Christology of stipulated by the Chalcedonian Council, and Isho Yad would actually, and they were from the same monastery, which is interesting. They are also excellent examples of epistolary compositions in Syriac by a fluent and able writer, and linguistically they are of much value. The extracts from the Syriac version of the Paradise of Palladius explain Thomas' narrative and form specimens of the contents of a work of which, so far as I know, nothing has hitherto been printed. Okay, let's continue with this. So this is the E.A. Wallis Budge, which is the author of this study and this book about Thomas of Marga, the Chronicles of Thomas of Marga, written in London in 1893. So that's also why I read these things, because I think it's interesting to read all books as they were. So let's go to the introduction. The manuscripts of the Book of Governors. I mean, people who work with manuscripts just blow my mind. The text of the Book of Governors by Thomas of Marga, as contained in this volume, is edited from MSS, indicated respectively by the letters of A, B, C, and VAT. The MS A belongs to the British Museum. Okay, we're going to talk about the manuscripts because this gets very technical. So let's see. The history of the persecution and slaughter of the holy martyrs whose names we have mentioned above. Some Syriac tests. For other versions of the history of martyrdom of Simeon Bar Sabai, Archbishop and Catholicus of Eastern Church, see right. Okay, so these are notes actually. So let's go to let's see about Thomas himself. Thomas, better known as Thomas of Marga, was the son of one Jacob, a native of the village of Beth Sharonaye, which was situated in the diocese of Salak. This province was divided into two parts, Inner Salak and Outer Salak, and was under the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan of Adiabene. Outer Salak was also called Salak de Nars or Salak de Babanes. Inner Salak was separated from Outer Azerbaijan, I guess, by Marmaran Ahmed, and was placed under the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Salak in the place of the province of Debwar, which he had taken from under his dominion. According to Thomas of Marga, we may safely assume that Inner Salak lay on the border of the Azerbaijan and that it was identical to Salak al-Audi. We are then also probably correct in placing the bishopric of Salak in the territory round about Rawandis, between Jebel el Kandil and the mountains which divide Persia from Turkey. That is to say, about 30 or 40 miles northeast of Haza or Erbil, Arbela, and about 8 miles, so Arbela is the capital of Adiabene, about 8 miles northeast of Mosul. The town on the right bank of the Tigris, exactly opposite to the mounts of Moyongjing. Moyongjing, okay, what is this? Is this Chinese suddenly? Kongyun, I have no idea how to pronounce this, and Nebi Yunus, which marked the site of Nineveh. Okay, Nineveh, all right, so Nineveh, we know where Nineveh is. The village of Beth, I mean, this is mind-blowing. This is a 19th century book, yeah, so they're going to give you all these names, and you're supposed to retain them, because they had better memory than we do. Nowhere in the book of Governors does Thomas give the family name of his father, and we cannot therefore, okay, so this is a very detailed kind of thing. So the exact date of the birth of Thomas, he still hasn't even been born. So the book of Governors and its plan and contents. Okay, the book of Governors is the largest and most important of the works which were written by Thomas, Bishop of Marga and Metropolitan of Beth Gadamai. And as all the existing manuscripts of the work agree in their arrangement of chapters and general context, we may conclude that it has come down to us in the form in which it left the hands of its author. In one place, Thomas records that he has written accounts of certain saints in another book, but it will seem that this work, which is no longer extant, unless a copy exists in some remote village in the mountains between Mosul and Urmi, was merely a supplement to the Book of Governors, and not a composition of the length and importance of that in which the complete text is now published for the first time. It is evident, too, that Thomas considered the Book of Governors to be the most important of his writings, for beyond this solitary allusion to another book, he makes no mention whatever of any other work by him, and all his references and quotations are made to chapters of the Book of Governors. His homily upon Mar Maram Ameh, written in 378 lines in dodecasyllabic meter, is included in the third section of the Book of Governors, and as the words "here endeth the third book" follow at the end, it is clear that its position is not accidental. That so able and learned a writer as Thomas, who flourished at a period notorious for its paucity of authors, both Nestorian and Jacobite, should have limited himself to the production of the Book of Governors, the metrical homily upon Mar Marathamed, and the other work referred to above, is incredible. Nevertheless, other writings by him are unknown, and none of the enquiries which I made of priests and scribes at Mosul and in the villages round about elicited any information on this matter. The composition of the Book of Governors must have extended over a period of several years. We know from Thomas himself that when he entered Beth Abi in 832, none of his lives of the holy men of that house had been written. And as he tells us several times that he obtained the information which he is given from Mar Abraham while he acted as secretary to him, the Book of Governors could not have been finished before Thomas was appointed Bishop of Marga. As Thomas is described as Bishop of Marga in the title of his work, and not as Metropolitan of Beth Gadmai, it is tolerably certain that it was completed, and that copies of it were in the hands of the scribes before Mar Abraham raised him to the latter dignity, which must, however, have taken place not later than 850 AD, for in that year the patriarch died. The Book of Governors occupies a unique position in Syriac literature, and it fully deserves the veneration with which it has been is still regarded by all classes of Nestorians to whom it is known. It must not be classed with compendious works like the Chronicle or Ecclesiastical History of Bar Hebreus, or with the ordinary lives of saints, in which the writer's only care is to exalt and at every cost the characters of the saints, and to revel in narratives of miraculous events and visions, or with the smaller histories of monasteries and their founders, which are frequently characterized by narrowness of minds and partly spirit. Okay, I don't think so, but all right. Thomas was a monk in the monastery of Beth Abi, and he shows great love for the house throughout his work. He was moved to write the histories of its holy men by the admiration which he felt for them and for their stern lives, And although in the course of his work, he loses no opportunity of recording any fact which redounds to the glory of his house or to the praise of its past inmates, he is at the same time anxious to record the noble deeds of other ascetics in the countries round about Marga, and whoever possible to give full and trustworthy accounts of matters which had a bearing upon the history of the Nestorian Church generally. A perusal of the Book of Governors will show that Beth Abbey was no ordinary monastery, and that its inmates were often as famous for their high social position as for their asceticism and learning. Many of the monks and ascetics therein belonged to the noble Persian and Arab families, and the far-reaching influence of its sons, who had gone forth into all parts of Armenia, Kurdistan, Babylonia, Arabia, Persia, and even into remote China, gave that house a reputation which must have eclipsed that of all others during the period of its greatest glory. The glory of the monks of the Skid Desert and of the Egyptian solitaries and ascetics of the Thebaid was greatly enhanced by the sympathetic history of Palladius, bishop of Helenopolis, who traversed all Egypt, from Alexandria on the Mediterranean sea coast in the north to rocky Sin in the south, in quest of materials for his work. And there is no doubt that Thomas of Marga's ambition was to write a lasting memorial of the learned and ascetic land of monks in his beloved monastery of Beth Abbey, which should be similar in every respect to the Paradise of Palladius. Okay, we have to check this Paradise of Palladius. Give me a second, I'm going to check it. Okay, Palladius. There you go. So, from his earliest youth, the traditions of the wonderful things which Rabban Mar Isho Zeka, bishop of Salah, had wrought in that country had been instilled into him. And having come to Beth Abbey, he used to listen to the histories of certain of its past inmates, and by reason of the fervor which burned in him, he never failed to make inquiries concerning them and endeavored. Okay, let's go forward. In the introduction, start reading the translation proper. Let's see. So we're on page 24, 37. The monastery of Beth Abbey. The exact situation of the monastery of Beth Abbey is unknown, but it is quite clear that it must have stood in the mountains at a short distance from the upper or Great Zab, that's the river, on its right bank. For when Bastomach, the Persian nobleman and friend of Jacob, the founder of Beth Abbey, went to visit him, he rode from the estate of Beth Ziwa, which lay on the left bank, and crossed the river by the King's Bridge, and passing by the village of Estwan, so came Beth Abbey. The monastery was built in the mountains to the south of Herpa and in Sabshafa, under the Mount Nifatis, about 60 or 70 miles to the northeast of Mosul, and it is probable that a town or village also called Beth Abbey was situated near it. The country in its immediate neighborhood seems not to have been suitable for growing fruit or vegetables which required much heat, for Thomas particularly mentions that Rabban Ezekiel, who founded the monastery, called after his name, used to send to Bethabe fruits and any good things which were not to be found here. On the other hand, it enjoyed a milder climate than Dasen, the district which extends from. Okay, for Thomas tells. Okay, so the weather, the food, the situation of the monastery. The monastery of Rabban Holmitz, talking about another one, was consecrated by the Patriarch Tomarsa II. Paul, the third abbot of Beth Abi. We know nothing except that he was one of the first party who left the great monastery and came to Beth Abi. He must have been an old man when elected to the headship of the monastery, and as Thomas, Bishop of Marga, says nothing about him except that he was the third abbot, we may conclude that he was neither remarkable for learning nor ability. From the 12th letter of the series which Ishoyab of Adiabene wrote while he was Bishop of Mosul, he may gain some idea of the difficulties of Paul as abbot of Beth Abi. And we may see that he was a little angry that Paul did not come and discuss them with him and take his advice upon them. Paul, it will seem, had been in the habit of speaking the truth plainly to the brethren concerning the manner of their lives, and he had acted the part of a master overmuch. As regards the brethren, quote, says the bishop, be not to them a teacher as unto thyself, but only a monitor of the commands of our Lord and of the doctrines of the fathers. And when thou hast reminded them, persuade them to keep them. If they are negligent, judge them in love, and if they are contumacious, testify to them concerning thy departure. If they entreat thee to remain, persuade them to keep the commandments, and if they do not keep them, they have then already informed thee that it is necessary for thee to remain with them. If it be necessary to depart, lay before them plainly the causes of thy departure, and depart blamelessly and without anger, and without leaving behind thee any just cause of accusation for hasty tongues. And as regards the former custom of the place which it may be necessary to change, fight against them by degrees, first of all permitting to remain that which is good, and then abrogate that which is less good. Here must be given a brief record of the life of Isho-Yab, the son of Bashomak, the Persian nobleman of Kuplana in Adiabene. Bashomak had been an intimate friend of Rabban Jacob and a supporter of his monastery, and the welfare of glory of Bethabe depended for many years upon the frequent gifts which this enlightened man and his generous son made to it. With the management of the internal affairs of the monastery, Bastomag had probably little to do, but this son, Isho-Yab, took a very active and personal part in its administration, and whenever possible he tried to keep the appointment of abbot in his own hands. The history of the advancement of Isho-Yab is practically the history of the progress of Bethabe. Isho-Yab was a disciple of Rabban Jacob of Bethabe in the early part of the 7th century, and he had studied at Nisibis, where his Syncellus bore the name of Hormizd. At a comparatively early age, he was appointed bishop of Mosul, where he lived until at least 628. After this period, he became metropolitan of Arbela and Mosul, and in 644, on the death of Mar Ameh, he was elected Catholicus. He lived through many of the troubled years of the wars of Khusrau with the Greeks. Khusrau is the Sasanian emperor, and he was an eyewitness of the calamities which befell the Nestorian church on the death of Yazdin, the advocate of the Christians, and he was Sassanid. Am I correct here? No, it's not Sassanid. Works of course. No, I'm wrong. Anyway, well acquainted with the events which led to the murder of Kursau. Let's check Kursau. Kursau. Okay, let's continue. So it's used this conflict as Christological debate. So Thomas Bishop thinks that Sadona, which was the heretic, was bewitched by the abbot, who is reported to have been a sorcerer, and that as soon as he bowed his head under the old man's hand, he lost his reason. Sadona was a disciple of Rabban Jacob of Bethabe and the author of several works, and the adoption of the dogma of the Jacobites by a man of such ability and by one who stood in such a position was a serious blow to the Nestorian interest. Isho-Yab, his friend, appears to have had some influence in appointing him to the Orthodox city of Mahose de Ariwan, and his defection was a great grief to him. In 5 very interesting letters written by Ishoyab, while he was the metropolitan of Arbela and Mosul, he explains the circumstances which led up to his apostasy. And from one of them, we are able to see clearly that Sadona's doubts about the dogma held by the Nestorians of the two natures of Christ were not of long standing. Ishoyab accuses him of having held secretly the views which afterwards made him so infamous to the Nestorian Church, until he saw that there was no possibility of his being appointed to the post which he most desired, that is, the bishopric of Adiabene, and that when he saw that this prize had slipped through his hands, he cast in his lot with the Nestorian community of Ariwan and became their bishop. After stating in brief that what is the substance of the doctrine of the true natures of Christ, Ishoyab goes on to refer to the absurd composition which Sadona wrote, entitled The Fictitiousness of Faith, and which he hid from him. But Ishoyab heard rumors of the work and asked him if he had written it. And when he admitted that he had, he asked him to produce it. When he had read it, they privately debunked Sadona, who straightway promised amendment. Shortly afterwards, Ishoyab heard that he had not fulfilled his promise, whereupon he sent 2 dear brethren to him with a letter of further rebuke. When Sadona had read this, he brought forth his work and expunged 16 chapters in their presence, and wrote a letter of grateful thanks to Ishoyab. Notwithstanding this recantation, Sadona betook himself to his chief supporter, who appears to have held a high position in the church, and according to Ishoyab, endeavored to stir him up to enmity against himself. Ishoyab refers to this work, Refutation of Heretical Opinions, and advises the clergy and people of Ariwan to read both it and another work which he had written against Sadona's opinions when they first appeared in the church, and he urges them to dismiss that silly man from his office of bishop. The letter, in which the whole matter is briefly described, is of great interest for the study of ecclesiastical history of the time. And the running version of it is as follows. To my beloved brethren of God, loving, venerable, believing, and renowned clergy in the Holy Church of Mahoz de Ariwan, Ishoyab, your brother in the Lord, peace. O my brethren, we have committed a fault, both ye and I, which is worthy of absolution. And now that this fault hath through itself become revealed, and hath, although having perceived it, I tried to hide it, kicked out, causing great confusion and tumult, and hath cast away from it the covering of its shame, and hath stood forth imprudently in the sight of all, it is necessary that I myself should come to you, that we may together meditate upon what it is needful to do, and that we should give a healthy mending to the injury which hath been done. For we erred when we raised to the exalted position of headship, by reason of a small outward manifestation of excellence of conduct and a hope for further excellence, a man lacking in understanding, who varied the instability of his thoughts by a multitude of changes of opinion, through not having perceived beforehand his defection from the orthodox faith, which happened in a secret chamber at short time before, when by the evil desire of the love of dominion he was drawn to corrupt the confession of truth by his stupid subtleties. Only in this he was very crafty, and he did in secret that silly treatise on the perversion of his opinion, until he had, with an abandonment worthy of suffering, seized the dominion over you. But as I have said, we deserve forgiveness because we were carried away by error, and because the disease of changeableness of the man was not of long standing, and because this changeableness took place suddenly and was wrought in a secret chamber, and because we never had been acquainted with this evil habit of instability in him, and because also with diabolical craft he manifested his foul belief only before those who were able to bestow upon him in return that which he was most anxious to possess, namely the bishopric of Adiabene. And having fallen from this with the loss of his hope, an evil fate cast him into an orthodox city, that is to say, to you, who have with strivings even into blood cleansed through a length of years the evil seed of Satan from among you. And ye have purified the dwelling place of your habitation, and your believing church from all the error of a plurality of forms of those who with the oneness of person, that is to say, oneness of nature, destroy the confession of our belief with the corruption of their blasphemies. And behold, ye are this day by the grace of God one body of orthodox men, which shineth gloriously with the rays of the vivifying light of the one adorable and glorious person of our Lord Jesus Christ, who is God over all, who hath equally of utterance with his Father in a perfect person, and who had also equally of utterance with us in the perfect speech of person, who showeth forth the unity of the manifestation of lordship perfectly in the glorious person of two forms, whose human body, when shining with the rays of Godhead, appeareth to the eyes to be man, but to the mind God, the sustainer of the universe. And in the unity of the divine image, every one shall recognize God, and every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess him. No man then shall teach his fellow citizen of his or his brother, and say, Know the Lord, for we all know him, and we all adore him. This then, in a few words, is the name and power and scope of the unity of our Lord. But certain erring men in time past, through their lack of understanding, that is to say, audacity, having fallen from this mystery, have set many stupid obstacles against the word of truth, and having become foolish in their mind, have become aliens from the life of God. And moreover also the written and unwritten divine word, which is in the holy church, hath in the mouth of her ministers in all generations led to the objection of daring men from the pasture of the inheritance of the Lord. Until this time of our sojourning, which is the old age of the world. And I was thinking, O my beloved brethren, that now that the world hath become worn out and old and very aged, and hath already declined, that is to say, now that the human understanding hath also perished and can no longer be discoverer of evil, that is to say, a silly receiver of vain imaginations, such stumbling blocks as these must remain of necessity, and we, that is, all of us who are under the wings of orthodoxy, and to whom hath come the lot of inheritance in the holy house of God, would rest a little from the injury of their offense. But now that the error of ignorance hath broken out at this time from a foolish, old, worn-out and shaken mind, through a man void of understanding, whom a temporary fate hath brought to the city of your habitation in the name of the governorship, it is necessary for our reconciliation that it be disturbed, and that we should give the necessary explanation for this stupid offender. Now he was a lover of these species of heresies, and desired that they should acquire in the world through him, the evil fame of renown, and therefore that silly man was himself led astray and turned aside to contemptible folly. And he wrote an absurd composition entitled The Fictitiousness of Faith, without either entreaty on the part of men or the need of necessity, which he hid from himself, and who all those who are like unto me until that time of which I have spoken before. And with difficulty, and after that he had received the service of dominion over you, when by the command of the rulers of the age time brought us all to the city of your habitation, on remembering slightly some rumor which I have heard, a short time before, I asked him if he had written anything according to what I had heard. And having confessed that he had written something, I asked him why he had hidden it from me. Then, being near, and he having uttered some feeble apology for this, I demanded that he should bring before me what he had written. And when he had brought it, and I had found it to be of an evil nature, I rebuked him privately and secretly with a severe reproof. And being moved by the severity of the reproof, he promised, but untruthfully, to correct the things which he had wickedly written. And having believed him to be a man who had but recently erred, I hoped that he had corrupted his belief not from natural wickedness of mind, but from the evilness of pride. And I defined for him a time for amendment which was more than the need of the matter required. And I departed from thence, having hidden his error in silence. Now he did not only not fulfill his promise, but he also went to his supporters, who made him confident by their speeches, and he was strengthened to confirm his babble, by the help of those whom he imagined to be sufficiently powerful to support him. And when I heard of the fraud which he had practiced upon truth, I wrote an exhortation and entreaty to him in brotherly feeling, and I made 2 dear brethren and fellow disciples of his and mine participators in the secret of the matter, and I sent them to him promptly. And I commanded them not to inform any one of you concerning these things, in order that I might not make an evil cause for the man who was seeking an evil cause. And when he had read those things which I wrote to him, and had heard also those things which were said to him by those God-loving brethren, he manifested a deceitful pretense and brought forth this silly book, and at their instigation and punched 16 chapters in the presence of the brethren, and he dismissed them in peace with a letter of gratitude to himself. And when those God-loving brethren had arrived and had informed me concerning the obedience of the silly man, I rejoiced and thanked our Lord that he had not allowed his feeble servant to fall from the good hope of orthodoxy of belief. And that silly man, wishing to reprove me because I had erred in believing in him in vain, and to make known to every man that he was working the will of Satan, rose up straightway after the departure of those God-loving brethren from him, and took my letter to him, and carried it diligently to that honorable head, through relying upon whom he had dared to fall into that silly wickedness. Now this he did with wicked craft and diabolical artifice, that he might stir him up to enmity against me, and to fight against me. And this was, as ye have already heard, the cause of the addition against me, from which arose wickedly all these things which have troubled the world. Amazing. And it is a marvelous thing that, being absolutely ignorant of everything concerning what was right, there should be found in him sufficient knowledge to perform this work of making a tumult in the church of God. Read then that work in order that ye may know what things happen through my care for him, and of his wicked cunning against the truth, and whatsoever is meet for the fear of God, and for the love of the truth which is in you, and for the good hope of the whole church of God concerning you, be ye diligent to carry out by the help of God. And may that merciful God, by whose hands cometh every good thing, with which he make those who fear him to abound, perfect you in all good to work his will always, all the days of your lives. Amen. So this is how Syriac Aisho Yab wrote letters. It's amazing. You can't do this through TikTok. Aisho Yab became Catholicus in 647. And as soon as he was established in his new office, he built at Beth Abi, the monastery, a splendid temple at great expense, and provided it with everything necessary for making the service glorious and impressive. Wishing to form a source of supply of monks for the service of the monastery generally and for his new church, he formed the intention of founding a school there near his cell, into which he might import teachers and masters and expositors, and where might gather together many scholars. The monks, however, objected to this, and Cam Isho represented to the Catholicus that the monastery was intended to be a place where they were to pass their lives in weeping and mourning, and not a school for children, and that they could not lead a life of contemplation if the noise of the voices of the boys learning to sing the chants of hymns was always ringing in their ears. Finally, they added that if he wished to build a school at all, it must be somewhere else in the land of Persia, the whole of which was under his dominion. To this the Catholicus answered that he intended to carry out his plan, firstly because with his wealth he had endowed the monastery with earthly possessions, and secondly because he was spiritually lord of all monasteries and converts. When Cam Isho saw that the Catholicus had determined to build a school at Beth Abi, he and Berath Surin and 70 monks of the congregation went into the martyrium and taking the coffin of Rabban Jacob, they left the monastery by night in tears and went forth to Herpa, a village of Sabshafa, and gathered together stones to build a monastery there. On the night, however, in which the monks departed, the Catholicus saw in a vision a mighty eagle bearing many eaglets upon his back, flying away from the place in the martyrium where Rabban Jacob was buried. And he seemed to hear cries from the young ones as if their food had been taken away from them. When he came to himself, he sent to the sacristan, who told him that Cam Isho and Berantha had 70 monks had already departed, and that the whole body of monks was making ready to follow them, believing this vision to be a divine indication that he was not to build the school in the monastery, he departed and built it in his native village Kupalana in Adiabene, and the monks returned to their cells. Shortly after Ishoyab left Beth Abbes, Simon, the metropolitan of Ru Ardashir in Persia and of the I can't read his names of Arabs in Qatar and Persian Gulf, refused to acknowledge his authority, and the ingenuity of the Catholicus was taxed to the utmost to keep this important section of the Nestorian Church from breaking away for good and all. In a series of 7 letters, he expostulates with Simon and with the various congregations under his charge that he succeeded in healing the breach, at least for a time, in spite of the excuse which Ishoyab made when Kam Isho asked him to write a life of Rabban Jacob, that the compiling of the books required leisure of mind. He found time to write the history of Isho Sabran, a convert from the religion of Zoroaster and a Christian martyr, the refutation of heretical opinions, and a number of exhortations, devices, services, hymns, and offices of baptism, absolution, and consecration. 3 series of letters written while he was Bishop of Mosul, Metropolitan of Arbela, and Catholicus respectively, the texts of many of which are printed in this volume, attests his untiring zeal for the Church and his careful watchfulness of every part of it, even in the most remote lands. One of the greatest services which he did for the Church was the arrangement of the Hudra, or service book, for the Sundays of the whole year, for Lent, and for the fast of Nineveh, which he drew up with the help of Anan Isho, the redactor of the Book of Paradise of Palladius. During the lifetime of Isho Yabn, the monastery of Beth Abi reached its highest point of glory and renown, and here he was buried when he died in 658. So it goes to further abbots. That was an interesting one because it's this Christological controversy. This amazing letter that he wrote. There's some canons. This is amazing. I mean, the work that this entails. And this is the actual Syriac text. How beautiful this writing is, yeah. Unbelievable. Okay, so very interesting. So if you read extensively these things, like you get a sense of, as I'm saying, like I'm against the anything that goes towards TikTok mode. Yeah, even if it's long, I want to. I prefer to do videos like this, and I understand that not many people are going to watch them, and I understand that probably nobody is going to watch the whole thing. But it's just very interesting, and I just had a deja vu, so I'm going to read this. Let's see. So the introduction actually makes a point of talking about the whole thing. It's a really long introduction, and then you have the text in Syriac. Yeah. So let's see these canons. I don't know who wrote them, but Canon 1. First of all, a life of tranquility according to the command of the fathers, and according to the word of the Apostle Paul, which he spake to the Thessalonians, saying, I ask from you, O my brethren, that ye abound more and more, and that ye study to be quiet, and to be occupied in your own matters. And again, he spake to them, saying, We command and we entreat you by our Lord Jesus Christ, that ye labor in quietness and eat your bread. And again, Isaiah says, The work of righteousness shall be peace, and the labor of righteousness quietness. And again, Abba Anthony said, When a fish is taken out of the water, it dieth. Even so doth the solitary who is brought outside his cell. And again, the holy Mark the Solitary said, If the body be not quiet, the mind cannot be quiet. Quietness then is preserved by these two causes, that is, constant reading and prayer, and by the labor of the hands and meditation, according to that which Abba Isaiah spake, and according to what the wise man Solomon spake. I think it's spoke, right? Idleness begetteth a multitude of evils. And again, the man who doth no work, the man who does not work, is at all time cast into lust. Therefore, let us be constant in ourselves in quietness, and let us flee from idleness, which is a thing that costs loss, being firmly persuaded that if we allow it to remain, it will be impossible for us either to bear leaves or to yield fruit, if indeed it happen not that we be altogether cut off from the life of the fear of God. Canon 2. Concerning fasting, we learn from the words of our Lord, When the Son of Man hath been lifted up, then shall they fast in those days. And again the Apostle Paul said, In much fasting, and again they were fasting and entreating God in prayer. And again from the fathers we learn that fasting shall be a helper for us before God. And again, let us not be slack in obedience to fasting. Concerning the fruits of fasting and the helps which arise from it, we may learn accurately from Moses and Elijah and Daniel and his companions, and our Savior and the apostles and all the fathers. Let us therefore preserve fasting inasmuch as it is the origin of a multitude of virtues and a guide to true life. Canon 3. Concerning prayer and reading and the recital of the offices for the day and night, we may learn from the word of our Redeemer, for he spoke to them a parable that they should pray at all times and be not remiss. And again, watch and pray at all times. And again, be watchful and pray that ye enter not into temptation. And the apostle Paul spoke, be ye continual in prayer, and be watchful therein, and give thanks. And also Mark said, prayer is the mother of virtues. Concerning reading, when the apostle wrote to his friend Timothy, he said, be zealous in reading, and in praying, and in doctrine until I come. Meditate upon these things, and remain in them. And our Lord God said to Joshua, the son of Nun, let not this book of the law depart from thy mouth, and meditate therein day and night. And again Moses said to the people, it shall be a sign upon thy hand, and a memorial between thy eyes. And from the fathers we learn that without constant reading and entreaty of God, it is not possible for a fair manner of life to exist in the soul. And Mark the holy man said, pray to God, and he shall open for thee the eyes of thy understanding, and thou shalt know the profit which ariseth from prayer and reading. Concerning the services of the hours of prayer, the psalmist said, 7 times in the day have I praised thee because of thy righteous judgments, and 3 times in the day did Daniel kneel upon his knees and pray and give thanks and praise before God. Canon 4. Of silence, and of meekness, and of solitude, and of how a man should not intrude speech when his brethren are talking, and of how he should speak with a gentle voice, and not with noise and anger. Concerning silence, Jeremiah the prophet saith, blessed is the man when he shall take thy yoke upon him in his youth, and shall sit by himself, and shall keep silence, because he hath taken thy yoke upon him. And again to Abba Arsenius was it said in a revelation, Arsenius, flee, be silent, and live in quietness. And again, be silent, and count thyself nothing. And concerning solitude, Jeremiah said, O Lord, the mighty one, I have not sat in the congregation of the scorners, but of the scorners, but I have feared thy hand, and I have dwelt alone. And concerning meekness, Isaiah said, to whom shall I look, and in what shall I dwell, if it be not in meekness, and in the lowly of spirit, who trembleth at my word? And our Lord said, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest for your souls. And that a man should not interrupt the speech of his brethren, we may learn from the wise man who said, speak not in the midst of narratives. Silence is the fruit of wisdom. And he that speaketh much himself indicates his lack of knowledge. And that a man should speak in a gentle voice, and not with noise and anger, we may learn from the apostle. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and blasphemy be removed from you, and let no hateful word go forth from your mouth. And again, cease from wrath, and let go displeasure. Let us then be careful to fulfill these things with all our might, for divine helps are hidden within them, and without them we are not able to please God. Canon 5. During the 40 days fast, a brother shall not go outside his cell without necessity, or without the permission of the community. Canon 6. A brother shall have no power to go round about among the monasteries, or in the towns or villages, unless it be on account of sickness, or by the permission of the community. He shall not, moreover, visit among the houses, or eat with believers. And to speak briefly, no man shall have the power to leave his cell or to go forth to any place without the permission of the head of his monastery. Canon 7. That no man shall murmur against his brother or slander him before his brethren or before any person whomsoever we may learn from the psalmist, who said, I have hated him that slandered his neighbor in secret. And again, thou didst sit and meditate wrong against thy brother. And also from the apostle, who said, Murmur you not, as certain of them have murmured. Murmur ye not, as certain of them have murmured. Let us then be watchful against slander, that we become not participators with the evil one. Canon 8. On the first day of the week, when the brethren are gathered together, whosoever shall come first to the church shall take the holy book and shall sit in the place which is set apart, and shall meditate upon it until all his brethren arrive, so that when each of them cometh, his mind may be laid upon hold upon by the hearing of the reading, and they turn not aside to speech upon matters which are alien to the day, or to narratives or rumors or battles and wars, or to conversation upon worldly matters, or to vain stories which do harm to the soul, or to that which is foreign to this life of excellence. Canon 9. Fasting shall not be abrogated except for causes such as these: sickness of the body, the arrival of strangers, a long journey, or hard manual labor which lasted the whole day. Let that brother of whom it is known that he breaketh and maketh of none effect this holy boundary of fasting by reason of his slack and negligent manner of life, and for none of the above causes, know that he is an alien to our congregation. Canon 10. When brethren come and they are accepted, let them be tried 3 years in the monastery, and then, if they have borne themselves in a befitting manner, the brethren shall give them permission to build cells for themselves, or according to what the strength of the community sufficed, let them help them as is customary. If there be empty cells, let them be given to them. If on the other hand they have not borne themselves in a seemly manner, let them be dismissed and go their way in peace. Canon 11. If any man perceived that his brother despised any one of these things which are spoken above or below, let him not report the matter among his brethren and trouble them, or to the head of the monastery to vex him. For a troublesome word troubleth the heart of a man. But let him call him, and speak to him privately, according to the word of our Redeemer. Rebuke him between thee and him only. And if he mendeth not, rebuke him before 2 or 3. And if he mendeth not, then let him be admonished before the whole community. And if he received not correction before the whole community, let him know that he is an alien to our congregation. So Rabban Abraham lived until the rule of the Patriarch Sarb-Isho, who sat from 996 to 604. So this is what I just read is a 6th century rule for monastic life. But at the time he is described as being an old man. The exact date of his death is unknown. He was succeeded in the abbotship of the great monastery of Dadisho. Oh, these names. Abbotship of the great monastery by Dadisho, a man famous as being the author of several works on the ascetic life. He was formerly a monk in the monastery of Risha in Marga, and he was the first disciple of Abraham. Like this master, he drew up a set of rules or canons from which he may see what important restrictions were introduced into the monastic life by him. Under his direction, a monk was bound to accept the doctrines of Diodorus, Theodore of Mopsuestia, and Nestorius, and anyone who held views different from them or from those of their followers, of who was attached to the error of the heresy of those falsely called Messiaiane, or who did not curse and abominate it, was obliged to leave the congregation. All right. Well, I think that's enough. Really, really interesting. I love this. We'll continue on the next one. Goodbye.